Settle in, cozy nights. Lower the lights, pull that blanket a little tighter, and let yourself drift. Tonight we are going somewhere cold and ancient and full of secrets. We are going back to Skyrim, but not the Skyrim you think you know. Not the one with the quest markers, and the fast travel, and the endless radiant dragon encounters that feel more like errands than prophecy. Tonight we are pulling back the curtain on the thing underneath all of that, the lore that breathes beneath every dungeon floor, every crumbling word wall, every whispered line of dialogue you probably clicked past too quickly, because there was a bandit camp on the horizon and your stamina bar was looking suspicious. There is a story buried inside Skyrim, and it is not the one the main quest tells you directly. The main quest, as most people experience it, is this. You are a prisoner. A dragon attacks. You discover you can shout. You climb a mountain. You go to an afterlife. You kill a big dragon. Credits roll. And that version is fine. It is genuinely good, but it is like reading only the first sentence of every chapter in a book and then saying, you have read the book. The version underneath, the one built from in-game books, loading screen text, dialogue lines scattered across the province, information from the UESP, the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages, which is essentially the most exhaustive fan wiki in gaming history, and from years of lore scholars doing the kind of obsessive cross-referencing that borders on academic. That version is something else entirely. It changes what Alduin is. It changes what you are. It changes why any of this is happening, what it costs, what it means, and what it leaves unresolved when the final note of that orchestral score fades out. Tonight we are going through 160 specific lore facts, organized into the broader story they tell. The story of how the most powerful being in the world abandoned his purpose, how mortals found a way to punish him for it, and how that reckoning echoed through thousands of years of history to land in a prison cart on the road to Helgen on an ordinary morning in the Fourth Era. The facts come in waves. Some are cosmological, some are political, some are the small human-scale details that make the big picture comprehensible. Some of them are things you can verify in 5 minutes of reading in-game books. Some of them require connecting dots across multiple games and multiple centuries of fictional history. All of them, once you know them, change how the world feels when you play. So let us start at the very beginning, not at Helgen, before Helgen, before the province of Skyrim, before Tamriel, before the mortal world existed at all. Part 1. Before the world, the cosmology that makes Alduin terrifying. If you want to understand why Alduin the World Eater is genuinely frightening on a level that most players never register, you have to understand the cosmological framework the Elder Scrolls universe is built on. Because Alduin is not simply a powerful antagonist, he is a necessary function of reality that has gone rogue. And that distinction is everything. In Elder Scrolls cosmology, existence is broadly divided into 2 planes. There is Aetherius, the infinite magical realm, the original state of being, the place where divine power flows from, and where souls eventually return. And there is Oblivion, the darkness between, the void that is neither divine nor mortal, a space of chaos and daedric power that surrounds the pocket of existence we call Mundus, the mortal world, the world where Tamriel sits. The mortal world, Nirn, the planet on which all of this takes place, was not created from nothing. According to the oldest texts, it was shaped from a meeting, or rather a collision, between the divine principles that would become the gods and the chaotic void of Oblivion. The creation of Mundus came at enormous cost. The Atada, the original spirits, had to give up something profound in order for the mortal world to take shape. Those who gave the most became the divines, the gods worshipped across Tamriel. Those who refused to contribute withdrew into Oblivion and became the Daedric princes. What they gave up, functionally, was their immortality and their infinite nature. Creating a finite world required becoming finite. And so the act of creation was also an act of sacrifice. The divines poured themselves into Mundus and became diminished, tethered to something fragile and temporary, because all mortal things, by definition, must end. This is where Alduin enters the picture, and where his nature becomes something far more complex than Big Bad Dragon. Alduin, whose name in the dragon language breaks apart into 3 components. Al, meaning destroyer, Du, meaning devour, and In, meaning master, is not a creation of Akatosh, so much as he is an aspect of Akatosh made manifest. And Akatosh is the dragon god of time, the chief of the divines, the first deity in the pantheon. Alduin is Akatosh's firstborn, his most powerful creation, and his appointed agent of cosmic termination. Let that land for a moment. Alduin was created with a specific job. That job was to end the world, not out of malice, not out of hatred. The end of the world, in Elder Scrolls cosmological thinking, is not a tragedy. It is a function. The mortal world exists in cycles, what the lore calls kalpas, enormous epochs of time that begin and end and begin again. When a kalpa reaches its conclusion, Alduin is supposed to consume it, devour the bones of creation, return everything to raw potential, and thereby allow a new kalpa to begin. He is not destroying the world out of cruelty, he is composting it. He is the mechanism by which existence renews itself. The ancient Nords knew this, at least partially. In the oldest Nordic texts, before the Dragon War, before the rebellion, Alduin was worshipped not just as a powerful dragon, but as the god of time itself. He was considered the first being to exist, the mightiest of all created things, and the inevitable force that would eventually sweep everything away and begin again. His name was sacred. It was forbidden for any ordinary person to speak it aloud. Only the dragon priests were permitted to utter his name directly. So when Alduin shows up in Skyrim causing problems, the question is not simply, why is this powerful dragon attacking us? The question is, why is the mechanism designed to end the world doing so on a personal, politically motivated, power-hungry timeline rather than the cosmic one he was designed for? And the answer to that question is the real story of Skyrim's main quest. At some point, before the events of the game, before recorded history, Alduin looked at his cosmic function and decided he did not want it. He was the firstborn of the most powerful god. He was the eldest and mightiest of all dragonkind. He commanded armies of magnificent predators who could breathe fire and speak reality into submission. And his assigned role was to eventually destroy everything, including himself, so that something new could grow. He refused, not loudly, not in a single dramatic moment of rebellion. He simply began doing something else instead. He stopped watching the clock of cosmic time and started watching the political map of mortal Tamriel. He stopped acting as the appointed terminator of the current Kalpa and started acting as its self-appointed god king. He and his dragons descended on the land now called Skyrim and demanded worship. Humans were enslaved. Temples were built. The dragon cult was born not as a religious movement that developed organically, but as an enforced theocracy imposed at the tip of a claw by beings who could dissolve solid rock with their voices. Here is the first fact that genuinely rewrites the main story. Alduin was not too evil. He was too selfish. The reason the universe needed him defeated was not because he was powerful and dangerous, though he absolutely was. It was because he had abandoned his cosmic function, and the current Kalpa could neither properly continue nor properly end with him, out of position. He was gumming up the works of existence itself by clinging to temporal power he was never meant to have. Defeating Alduin is not about saving the world in the conventional heroic sense. It is about putting the universe's reset mechanism back into alignment, which, if you sit with it, is genuinely unsettling. Because it means the Dragonborn is not ultimately a savior. The Dragonborn is, on some level, the person who fixed the machine, so that the machine can eventually end everything. You are not saving the world. You are ensuring the world can eventually be properly destroyed when the time comes. That is a completely different story than the one most players walk away with. Now, into the cosmology, more specifically, because there are details here that matter for everything that follows. The sun, in Elder Scrolls cosmology, is not a ball of burning gas. It is a wound. When the original spirits were creating Mundus, Magnus, the god of magic and the architect of reality's magical structure, grew terrified by what creation was costing him. He fled. He tore a hole in the fabric of the newly forming world and escaped through it into Aetherius. That tear became the sun. The light of the sun is literally magical energy bleeding through from the divine realm on the other side. The smaller stars are smaller tears made by lesser spirits who fled at the same time. This is not a poetic metaphor in the Elder Scrolls. This is presented as cosmological fact in the oldest texts. Every night, you look up at the stars in Skyrim's sky. You are looking at the scar tissue of divine abandonment. The gods fled creation. They left holes when they left. Those holes still leak divine light, and that light is what makes magic possible in the mortal world. The entire economy of magical power in Tamriel flows through ancient wounds left by fleeing deities. What does this have to do with the main quest? More than you might think, because Alduin's banishment by the ancient Nords, using an Elder Scroll, created another wound, a temporal one, at the summit of the throat of the world. We will come back to that, but understand first that the world of Skyrim is not a solid, stable thing. It is a patchwork of old injuries and cosmological compromises, held together by tradition and faith and the weight of mortal belief, and Alduin's return threatened to rip it apart in ways that went far beyond physical destruction. The concept of the Kalpa, the cycle of worlds, is not simply background mythology. It is load-bearing structure in the lore. The Elder Scrolls universe does not have a linear history, moving from creation toward some inevitable final destination. It has a cyclical history, one that ends and begins and ends and begins in rhythms that mortal civilization can barely perceive. The timescale is so vast that even the ancient Dwemer, with their sophisticated philosophical framework, could only theorize about the mechanism, rather than directly observe it. What this means for the main quest is specific. When you defeat Alduin, you are not preventing the end of the world in the way that phrase normally functions in fantasy narratives. You are not saving existence from termination. You are ensuring that the current Kalpa proceeds on its proper schedule, neither prematurely ended by a self-appointed god-king, nor kept artificially extended by his refusal to fulfill his function. The universe breathes. The Kalpas are its breaths. Alduin's transgression was holding his breath to assert control over the room. You made him release it. Let us also establish the Daedric princes before we move on, because they are threads that run through everything we are going to discuss tonight. The Daedric princes are the spirits who refuse to participate in creation. They kept their infinite nature. They kept their immortality. They withdrew into oblivion and built their own realms there, pocket dimensions, each reflecting the nature and personality of the prince who created them. There are 16 Daedric princes. Each controls a sphere, a concept or force. Hermaeus Mora is the prince of knowledge and fate. Meridia is the prince of life and light. Molag Bal is the prince of domination and enslavement. Merunas Dagon is the prince of destruction, and so on. These beings are not evil in a conventional sense, at least not all of them. They are vast, alien intelligences with motivations and desires that operate on entirely different scales from mortal concerns. Several of them will intersect directly with the Dragonborn story, in ways the main quest does not emphasize, but the lore makes absolutely clear. The most relevant for tonight, beyond the general political background, is Hermaeus Mora, because Hermaeus Mora knew about the Dragonborn long before the Dragonborn knew about themselves. And his fingerprints are on the beginning of the Dragonborn lineage in ways that are deeply uncomfortable to look at directly. But we will get there. First, we need to spend some time with the dragons themselves. Part 2. The Dragon War, a rebellion against a false god. Before we sleep tonight in this cold northern land, let us stand for a moment in the Merethic era, not the Fourth Era, where Skyrim, the game, takes place. The Merethic era, the age of myth, the age before the First Era began, which is already ancient history by the time the game starts. The age when dragons were not yet enemies to be hunted, but divine rulers to be obeyed. The Merethic era in Skyrim's history is measured backwards from the founding of the First Empire. The further back you go, the more mythological events become, until you reach a point where the distinction between historical record and sacred story essentially dissolves. This is appropriate, because the Dragon War, the central conflict that shaped all of Nordic civilization and created the conditions that ultimately lead to Skyrim's main quest, happened in that deep mythological past. When the Proto-Nords, the Atmarans as they were called, first migrated south from the frozen continent of Atmora and began settling what would become Skyrim, they brought a religion with them. A religion built around animal totems. Among these totems were the hawk, the wolf, the snake, the whale, the bear, and foremost among all of them, the dragon. In the ancient Nordic tongue, the word was dragon. To speak it was forbidden unless you were a priest. These early settlers encountered actual dragons already present in the land, and the relationship that formed was deeply strange. Dragons were apex predators of almost divine capability. They could reshape reality with their voices. They were effectively immortal, unless something powerful enough to stop them intervened. And they were, by nature, creatures of absolute hierarchy, driven by an instinct to dominate, to establish clear chains of power, to rule. The dragon cult that arose from this encounter was not, initially, a tyranny. In its earliest form, in the old homeland of Atmora, before the migrations to Tamriel, the arrangement was described as mutually beneficial. Dragons provided protection and magical knowledge. Humans provided tribute, worship, and a network of servants, willing to do the mundane work that great predators find beneath them. The dragon priests, who mediated between the two species, were intermediaries of genuine prestige, respected by both humans and dragons, capable of translating between two very different modes of existence. This is the second major fact that changes how you read the main quest. The dragon cult was not always evil. The rebellion that became the Dragon War was not a rebellion against an arrangement that had always been monstrous. It was a rebellion against something that had been corrupted. What corrupted it? The lore is not entirely clear, but the most coherent explanation is Alduin himself. When the Atmorans migrated to Tamriel and the dragon cult followed, the dynamics shifted. The new land had different power structures, different political pressures, and Alduin, operating entirely outside his cosmic function and deep in his self-styled role as God King, began pushing his dragon priests toward increasingly extreme behavior. Tribute became sacrifice. Worship became subjugation. The protective relationship became exploitation. The dragon priests in Tamriel became something the original version of the cult would not have recognized. They implemented brutally cruel laws. They demanded horrific rituals. They collected human lives as casually as taxes. The ancient texts found in the game, the book called The Dragon War, describe the situation that existed before the rebellion in terms that are almost hard to read. Entire populations reduced to servitude, families separated. The Thu'um used not to protect communities, but to obliterate anyone who questioned the divine right of the cult's hierarchy. Here is something the main quest gestures at, but never fully explains. The rebellion did not happen all at once. It did not spring fully formed from a single act of heroism. It grew slowly over generations, as the horror of the arrangement became impossible to ignore, and as small acts of defiance gradually coalesced into something more organized. And it almost certainly would have failed without two critical interventions. The first was Parthenax, and we will spend an entire section with him because he deserves it. The second was the Dragon Rend Shout. The Dragon Rend Shout is one of the most philosophically remarkable things in all of Skyrim's lore, and it is criminally underexplored in the main quest itself. Most players encounter it as a mechanic. Shouting it at Alduin forces him to land, making him vulnerable. Great. Fight begins. Good strategy. Move on. But the nature of the shout is extraordinary. Dragons, by their fundamental nature, are incapable of understanding mortality, not because they are stupid, but because their mode of existence is genuinely different from mortal existence. A dragon does not experience time the way a mortal does. Dragons do not fear death the way mortals do, because their relationship with death is different. Their souls cycle and persist in ways mortal souls do not. The concept of being finite, of having a life that can be permanently extinguished, of facing an end that does not cycle back to a beginning, this is not something a dragon can intuitively grasp. Dragon Rend, in the lore, works by forcing the concept of mortality into a dragon's mind. The three heroes who created it, Hakon One-Eye, Feldir the Old, and Gormlaith Goldenhilt, were the first mortals to craft a word of power from their own experience, rather than from observation of dragons. They used the language of dragons against its creators by pouring into it everything they knew about being mortal, about being fragile, about being afraid, about the way death smells when it gets close. The shout does not damage dragons physically. It damages them conceptually. It forces a creature that cannot normally understand mortality to feel it briefly, overwhelmingly. And the shock of that understanding is so profound that it drops them out of the sky. That is a weapon that could only have been made by creatures who suffer. The dragon cult's subjects turned their greatest weakness, their fragility, their finite lives, into the only thing that could wound their infinite masters. When you use Dragonrend in Skyrim's main quest, you are not using a powerful game mechanic. You are delivering several thousand years of accumulated human suffering directly into Alduin's nervous system. The history of every human who died under dragon rule, every sacrifice, every humiliation, every terrible act committed in service of a theocracy that decided your life was worth less than a dragon's momentary comfort, all of it compressed into 3 words. No wonder it makes him fall. The Dragon War itself, once the rebellion began in earnest, was a grinding, multi-generational conflict. Dragons are not easily killed. Even with the Thuum, even with Dragonrend, even with Paarthurnax teaching humans to fight back effectively with their voices, the war was brutal. Cities burned. Populations were decimated. The land was shaped by it in ways you can still see in the game. The circular burial mounds, where the bodies of slain dragons were interred by the cult's remaining faithful, the ancient Nordic tombs, where the warriors who fought the war eventually rested, the word walls scattered across the province that serve as monuments to where the fighting was fiercest. When Alduin was finally confronted at the summit of the throat of the world, the 3 heroes had everything they needed to try to end him. They had Dragonrend to force him down. They had the Thuum to fight him, and they had an Elder Scroll. But here is the thing the game only half explains. They could not kill Alduin. Not permanently. Not in the way you kill a mortal enemy. Alduin is not simply a powerful dragon who happens to be hard to defeat. He is, cosmologically speaking, necessary. He is a function of Akatosh himself, the universe's reset mechanism. Killing him outright, even if it were possible, might have consequences that went far beyond removing one antagonist. You do not simply delete the end-of-the-world function from reality's operating code without knowing what that does to the rest of the system. So instead, the ancient Nords did something that was either brilliantly clever or terrifyingly short-sighted, depending on your perspective. They used the Elder Scroll to displace Alduin through time. Not to kill him, to throw him forward into an unspecified future moment, hoping that someone in that future would have the means to deal with him properly, in the cosmologically correct way. Which is, of course, you, walking toward the chopping block in Helgen, the Dragonborn, the person the universe needed specifically in this moment, because only a Dragonborn has both the capacity to fight Alduin on equal terms and the metaphysical authority to end him in the way he needs to end. Not just killed, but properly finished, in a way that corrects the cosmic error of his self-appointed tyranny. The ancient Nords did not save the world at the throat of the world. They pressed pause. And they left the actual solution to you. Part 3. Dragon Priests, the administrators of a lost empire. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from tonight and what time it is there. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is a good moment. Let this be your relaxing ritual tonight. Now, the Dragon Priests, because they are everywhere in Skyrim. Because they are everywhere in Skyrim. Their tombs are in every corner of the province. Their masks are among the most powerful items in the game. And the story of who they actually were, what they actually did, and what happened to them is one of the most tragic and complicated threads in all the game's lore. We established that the original dragon cult was not entirely monstrous. The dragon priests in their original form, especially in Atmora before the migration to Tamriel, were respected intermediaries. They had status, genuine power, and a diplomatic function that kept the relationship between 2 very different species functional. They translated between humans and dragons, managed resources, maintained rituals that satisfied both parties, and in doing so, kept the peace. By the time the Dragon War was in full swing, all of that was ancient memory. But here is a detail the game embeds in the very structure of the Dragon Priest masks, and in the architecture of Labyrinthian, that most players walk right past. The 8 high-ranking Dragon Priests, the ones whose masks you collect throughout the game, were not generic servants of Alduin. Each one was individually bonded to a specific dragon, not to the dragon cult as a whole, not to Alduin as their supreme leader, to a particular dragon patron. The masks were not standardized equipment. They were personalized gifts from individual dragons to their particular priest, enchanted to reflect the nature and personality of that specific patron relationship. This is why the masks have such different enchantments. Morokei's mask boosts magicka regeneration. Mirak's mask absorbs magicka. Nakrian's grants both magicka and destruction bonuses. Volsung's adds carry weight and improves prices. These are not random enchantments selected from a loot table. They are reflections of specific relationships between specific individuals who knew each other well enough for the enchantment to carry that kind of personal resonance. The 8 high-ranking dragon priests convened periodically at Brumjunar, which we now call Labyrinthian. That complex in the Jalmark hold, the one with all the draugr and the magical barriers and the complicated corridors, was not merely a temple. It was the administrative capital of the dragon cult's theocratic empire. The dragon priest shrine you find deep within it, with busts of 8 masked figures arranged in a semicircle, was not a decorative installation. It was the physical manifestation of the cult's political hierarchy. Those 8 figures represented the council that managed the entire enterprise of dragon rule over Tamriel. They met to settle territorial disputes between their dragon patrons. They arbitrated conflicts about borders, resources, tribute collection, and law enforcement. The dragon cult was not simply a religion. It was a complete governmental system, with a structured hierarchy, checks and balances, and a judicial function built into its very core. The dragon priests were not merely priests in the religious sense. They were something more like governors, appointed by divine authority, managing the day-to-day administration of a continental empire. This makes the Dragon War not just a rebellion against tyranny, but a revolution against an entire governing structure. When the Nords rose up, they were not simply throwing off a bad ruler. They were dismantling a complete civilization, a form of social organization that had been in place for thousands of years. The aftermath, the scattered ruins, the undead draugr guards still dutifully protecting tombs, the dragon burial mounds maintained by the cult's last faithful. This is not the wreckage of a defeat. This is the archaeological remnant of an entire world that no longer exists. And it went out not with the roar of battle, but with something quieter and stranger. The last significant concentration of dragon cult loyalists, those who refused to abandon their faith, even after Alduin's banishment, gathered in a fortified monastery in the Geral Mountains called Foral Host. This was in the year 1 Era 139, according to Nordic dating. When Nordic scouts under King Harald discovered the stronghold and prepared to take it, the dragon cult's members, led by the dragon priest Rago, chose to die on their own terms rather than surrender. They drank poison. The entire population of Forelhost chose death over apostasy. When Harald's forces breached the gates, they found only corpses. A civilization, in its final act, quietly removing itself from the world rather than living to see its beliefs declared heresy. That is Forelhost on the map, the ruined castle in the southeast corner of Skyrim near the Rift. Players go there to collect a dragon priest mask. The dungeon is a dungeon. But underneath the dungeon design, underneath the draugr and the traps and the loot tables, there is a mass grave. There is the last chapter of an empire that once ruled a continent. The draugr, who guard dragon cult sites throughout Skyrim, are, in the lore, former members of that cult. Not random undead stumbled into burial chambers. These were people who dedicated their lives to the dragon priests, who believed deeply enough in Alduin's divine return that they voluntarily entered a death-like state to guard the remains of slain dragons until the World Eater came back to resurrect them. They have been waiting, in the cold and dark, for thousands of years. When you walk through a Nordic tomb and the draugr rise to attack you, you are disturbing people who were keeping a vigil. They have been keeping it since before recorded history by most of Tamriel's standards. You are not fighting mindless monsters. You are fighting true believers whose dedication to their cause outlasted their ability to comprehend that the cause died. There is one more dragon cult detail that connects directly to the main quest in ways the game is quiet about. The dragon burial mounds scattered across Skyrim, those distinctive circular earthworks you find throughout the landscape, each one marking where a slain dragon was interred by the cult's faithful, were not passive graves. They were active sites of worship. The cult believed Alduin would return, and that these graves needed to be maintained, the bodies preserved, the dragon souls kept intact against the day of resurrection. And when Alduin does return in the 4th Era, when he begins systematically landing at these mounds and using his unique resurrection shout to raise his fallen brethren, He is essentially activating a burial network that has been maintained for thousands of years, specifically for this purpose. The dragon cult's millennia of faithful maintenance of these sites was not futile. It was preparation. Every cultist who ever kept a vigil at a burial mound, every draugr who chose undeath over dissolution to guard these remains, contributed to the moment in Skyrim's main quest, when Alduin begins his army. When the game presents you with a quest to investigate dragon burials using the Dragonstone tablet, it is presenting you with something much more specific than a monster attack. It is showing you the activation of a prepared resurrection network that has been dormant for thousands of years and was always designed to do exactly what it is now doing. Part 4. Paarthurnax, 10,000 Years of Doubt. Let us talk about the most philosophically interesting character in Skyrim. Not the Dragonborn, not Alduin, Paarthurnax. His name, in the dragon language, means ambition overlord cruelty. He named himself this. Think about that. He chose a name that is a confession, a permanent reminder of what he was before he decided to become something else. Every time someone speaks his name, they speak his crimes. He wears his history and his title the way some cultures carve warnings above prison gates. Paarthurnax was, before his defection, Alduin's most trusted lieutenant. Not just a powerful dragon in Alduin's service, but the one Alduin trusted most, the one who sat at the top of the hierarchy directly below the World Eater himself. The Akaviri Dragon Guard, the order that would eventually become the Blades, described him in their records as a legendary figure among Alduin's forces, a dragon of enormous power and absolute devotion to his master's cause. What caused him to defect? The game allows Paarthurnax himself to speak to this, and what he says is worth sitting with carefully. He describes a moment of recognition, a philosophical break. He began to see that Alduin's rule was not simply a natural order expressing itself, as dragon theology would have it. It was a distortion. A creature meant to eventually end all things clinging to temporary power, demanding worship he was never meant to receive, corrupting the arrangement between humans and dragons from a sustainable relationship into a system of escalating abuse. Paarthurnax does not describe his defection as heroic. He is careful not to do that. He describes it as a choice that went against everything his nature told him to do. Dragons are not built for doubt. They are built for certainty, dominance, the clean clarity of hierarchy. The concept of questioning the order of things is, for a dragon, deeply unnatural. And Paarthurnax lived with that unnaturalness for a very long time before it crystallized into action. When he finally chose to help the humans, he did not do it by fighting Alduin directly. He could not. His nature, his deep instincts, the biological and spiritual architecture of dragonhood, pulled him toward obedience to the strongest dragon above him. What he could do was teach. He found the humans who were fighting back, who were learning to use their voices, who were developing the beginnings of what would become the Thu'um, and he became their teacher. This is the third major fact that rewrites the main quest. The Thu'um, the entire tradition of Nordic voice magic, the thing that defines the Dragonborn, the thing that makes the main quest possible, did not emerge from human ingenuity alone. It was taught to humans by a dragon who was betraying his own race to do it. The entire foundation of Nordic culture's most sacred tradition, the way of the voice that the Greybeards practice, the shouts carved on word walls across the province, the whole thing traces its origin to a dragon who chose to be something his nature said he could not be. After the Dragon War, after Alduin was banished through the Time Wound, Paarthurnax retreated to the throat of the world, not to retire. Not to rest in peace after a long struggle. He went there specifically because the throat of the world was where the Time Wound was created, where Alduin had been displaced into the future, and he knew Alduin would eventually return to that exact spot. He has been there ever since. Thousands of years, meditating, practicing the way of the voice, fighting, daily, against every instinct his nature gives him. He says this explicitly to the Dragonborn when you meet him. His daily existence is a battle not against an external enemy, but against himself. Every morning, metaphorically, he wakes up as a creature of domination and conquest and chooses, again, not to be that. He has made that choice every day for roughly 4,000 years. That is not a comfortable existence. That is not a story of heroic virtue rewarded. That is the story of someone who saw something wrong, made an irreversible decision to oppose it, and then spent 4,000 years living with the permanent discomfort of going against their own deepest nature every single day with no guarantee it would matter. The Greybeards know this about him. The order of monks at High Hrothgar, who practice the way of the voice in his tradition, who have dedicated their lives to his philosophy, know exactly what their founder is. They protect him. They keep his existence largely secret. They refuse to tell the Blades where he is even under considerable pressure, because they understand that what Paarthurnax represents is too important to lose to the Blades' demand for simple, uncomplicated justice. Speaking of which, Delphine and Esbern, the surviving Blades members you help reconstruct the Order during the main quest, demand that you kill Paarthurnax. Not because he is currently doing anything harmful, not because he has committed any recent crimes, but because of what he did thousands of years ago, when he served Alduin and did terrible things in service of a terrible master. The Blades argue that a dragon will always be a dragon, that his nature is unchangeable, that thousands of years of apparent virtue cannot be trusted. They want him dead on principle. The Greybeards argue that redemption is real, that Wigie Paarthurnax has accomplished the way of the voice, the teaching of humans, thousands of years of demonstrated nonviolence, matters more than what he did before he changed. Neither side is entirely wrong, and the game does not resolve this for you. It simply makes you choose, and then it makes you live with the choice. If you kill Paarthurnax, you gain the Blade's support, but lose access to everything Paarthurnax was still willing to teach you. You also, in the lore, destroy the entity who was most dedicated to Alduin's eventual return being handled correctly. The one dragon who understood both the dragon perspective and the human perspective, who could have served as a bridge between species in the aftermath of Alduin's defeat, is gone. If you spare Paarthurnax, the Blades refuse to help you further until you reconsider. You keep a complicated, ancient being who has been doing genuine good for thousands of years. You also, arguably, fail to deliver justice to everyone who suffered under his earlier service to Alduin. The game presents this as a choice between two organizations. The lore presents it as a question about the nature of moral accountability, the reality of change, and whether a being's past defines them more than their accumulated present actions. It is a philosophy class embedded in a quest decision. There is one more thing about Paarthurnax that the main quest mentions briefly and then moves past, but which has enormous implications. After Alduin is defeated, Paarthurnax expresses a desire to reach out to the surviving dragons, to try to teach them the way of the voice, to see if the philosophical revolution that changed him could be shared more broadly. He wants to reform dragonkind. This is, from a certain angle, the most ambitious thing in the entire game. Not the Dragonborn's quest, not Alduin's war. The dragon who spent 4,000 years learning to be better than his nature, trying to spread that lesson to others of his kind. Whether it succeeds or not is deliberately left open. But the fact that it was attempted, the fact that one dragon's long, painful commitment to self-examination might ripple outward and change an entire species, is a story that the main quest barely registers before the credits roll. Part 5. The Dragonborn. What you actually are. Let us talk about what you are. Not your character's race or build or backstory. What a Dragonborn actually is, cosmologically, in the lore. Because the answer is stranger and more specific than most people realize. The word Dovahkiin translates to Dragonborn in Common, the lingua franca of Tamriel. But if you parse it differently, as a three-word dragon name rather than a compound title, it translates as Dov-a-Kiin, which means born hunter of dragonkind. That second reading is not accidental. The name the universe gives to dragonborn individuals, the name they carry in the dragon language, essentially means the weapon-made flesh. You are not simply someone born with dragon blood. You are the answer to dragons. You are what the universe produces, selectively, when dragonkind becomes a problem that needs solving from the outside. A dragonborn is a mortal person born with the blood and soul of a dragon, not influenced by dragons, not trained by dragons, not granted dragon power by an outside force after birth, born with it, from the beginning, a mortal body housing a fundamentally draconic soul. This distinction matters because it determines what a dragonborn can do that no one else can. When a dragonborn kills a dragon and absorbs its soul, they are not performing a magical trick. They are engaging in a uniquely specific metaphysical process. Dragon souls, in the lore, do not die when a dragon's body is destroyed. They persist. They cycle back. They are supposed to be available for Alduin to resurrect. What the Dragonborn does when they absorb a dragon soul is something more final. They are consuming it in a way that removes it from the cycle entirely, integrating it into themselves, making it unavailable for resurrection or recurrence. This is why Alduin can raise dead dragons who still have their souls intact in their bodies, the ones whose burial mounds you find throughout Skyrim, but cannot re-raise dragons whose souls the Dragonborn has already absorbed. The absorb process is permanent, in a way that simple death is not. When you take a dragon soul, you are not stealing it. You are eating it in the same fundamental way Alduin is supposed to eventually eat the world. You are performing on a small scale the same function Alduin performs on a cosmic one. You are, in a very specific sense, competing with Alduin for dragon souls. And because you are doing it as a mortal with a dragon soul, rather than as the cosmic mechanism itself, you are removing those souls from the cycle in a way that prevents them from being part of whatever Alduin is building toward. The ability to absorb dragon souls came first, not to Alessia, who is often identified as the first Dragonborn in the conventional sense. It came to Mirok. But the UESP and supporting texts clarify that Mirok was the first to develop this specific ability, while earlier, Dragonborn like Alessia may have had different aspects of the gift. We will come back to Mirok in his own section. He deserves the attention. The lineage of Dragonborn in Elder Scrolls history is not random. It is not genetic. You cannot inherit it from a Dragonborn parent. It is a direct gift from Akatosh, the dragon god of time, and it appears specifically at moments of historical crisis, when the standard tools of mortal civilization are insufficient to handle what is happening. Alessia was the first mortal to make covenant with Akatosh, and through that covenant gained the Dragonborn gift to lead her people out of slavery. Reman Cyrodiil was Dragonborn, and his voice was powerful enough to stop an Akaviri invasion by the force of his shout alone, turning them into allies. The Septim dynasty carried Dragonborn blood. And in the Fourth Era, when Alduin's return poses a threat that cannot be handled by armies or politics or the standard instruments of power, the gift appears again. It appears in you, a prisoner in a cart, headed to an execution, whose name was not supposed to be on any list. General Tullius's aide explicitly says, your name is not on the execution list when you arrive at Helgen. You are not even supposed to be there. You were caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, swept up in a military action that had nothing to do with you, and this is not accidental. The lore strongly implies that the universe, or more specifically Akatosh, does not select Dragonborn from the ranks of heroes and warriors. It finds them in unlikely places, at unlikely moments, in circumstances that look like coincidence from the outside, but which have a quiet inevitability when you look at what they are needed for. You were going to die in Helgen. Alduin's attack saved your life. And while there is debate in the lore about whether Alduin consciously chose to attack Helgen because he sensed the Dragonborn, or whether his emergence from the time wound simply deposited him there by cosmological necessity, the result is the same. The World Eater and the Dragonborn appear in the same place at the same moment, each immediately aware of the other, both set on a collision course that has been in preparation since the ancient Nords decided to press pause instead of pulling the switch. There is one more thing about the Dragonborn nature that the main quest almost says but never quite does. When you absorb dragon souls and use them to unlock shouts, you are not simply learning new abilities. You are, in the lore, incorporating fragments of other beings into yourself. Dragon souls carry memory, personality, accumulated experience. Absorbing them adds those things to you, not necessarily in a way you consciously access, but in a way that changes you. The Greybeards are quietly concerned about this. They warn that a Dragonborn must be careful not to let the accumulated weight of dragon souls pull them away from their mortal nature and toward a more draconic one. Dragons, as we have established, are creatures of domination, certainty, and absolute hierarchy. The more of their souls you absorb, the more you risk absorbing those instincts along with the power. The Way of the Voice is not simply a martial arts philosophy for magical shouting. It is a set of disciplines specifically designed to help a dragonborn remain human, while doing something that is, by nature, deeply inhuman. Part 6. The Blades Invaders Who Became Guardians. Before we continue, let us pull back to an institutional level and talk about the Blades. Because their history is extraordinary, and their presence in the main quest is a constant reminder of how institutions built for one purpose can be warped beyond recognition by the passage of time. The Blades who you meet in Skyrim's main quest are Delphine and Esbern, two survivors, the last of an order that was essentially exterminated by the Thalmor in the aftermath of the Great War. They are paranoid, secretive, driven, and very hard to like on first impression. Delphine, in particular, is so cautious and suspicious that she makes every interaction feel like a test you might be failing without knowing the criteria. This makes complete sense when you understand what happened to their order. Not just the Great War, the whole history. The Blades began as the Akaviri Dragon Guard. Akavir is a continent to the east of Tamriel, largely mysterious, largely unknown to most of Tamriel's inhabitants. The people of Akavir, specifically the Tsaiski, a serpent-like humanoid race whose exact nature is debated in the lore, were obsessed with dragons. They had been hunting dragons in their homeland for an indeterminate but very long period before they ever set foot in Tamriel. They knew things about dragon hunting, dragon anatomy, dragon culture, and dragon behavior that the people of Tamriel simply did not have access to. In the year 1 era 2703, the Akaviri forces invaded Tamriel. They marched through Morrowind and Skyrim with devastating efficiency. They were not conquering for territory or resources in any conventional sense. Their motivation, as far as the historical records reflect it, was the search for something specific. They were looking for a dragonborn. The Akaviri believed, based on their own prophetic traditions, that there was a specific type of individual in Tamriel who possessed dragon blood, and that this individual was uniquely capable of leading a new empire. They were not wrong. When their forces reached the Pale Pass in the Geralt Mountains and came up against the armies of Riemann Cyrodiil, what happened next was not a battle. Riemann shouted. His voice carried such overwhelming power that the entire Akaviri force stopped fighting and knelt. They recognized, immediately, what he was. They proclaimed him Dragonborn and pledged their service to him on the spot. This moment, a foreign army invading Tamriel, and then voluntarily becoming the personal guard of the person who stopped them with the power of his voice alone, is one of the stranger passages in Elder Scrolls history. But it is authentic. The Akaviri Dragon Guard became Rimon's most elite personal guard, bringing their dragon hunting expertise, their distinctive armor and fighting styles, and their deeply specific knowledge about the nature of dragonborn individuals to the service of the Riemann dynasty. Over the centuries that followed, through the Riemann dynasty and into the era of Tiber Septim, the organization transformed. Tiber Septim, who was himself dragonborn, reorganized the Dragon Guard into what became the Blades. Under Septim, the Blades diversified dramatically. They became not only the Emperor's personal guard, but his intelligence service, his diplomatic corps, his spy network, and his special operations force. They were everywhere in the Empire, in ways that most citizens never recognized. Blade agents operated as merchants, scholars, diplomats, and ordinary travelers across all of Tamriel, reporting back to the Emperor's innermost circle. Skyhaven Temple, which you discover during the main quest when you follow Alduin's Wall, was an Akaviri outpost built during the original invasion period and then repurposed as a major blade facility. The construction of Alduin's Wall inside it was commissioned by Emperor Riemann in the Second Era as both a record and a prophecy, a pictorial account of Elder Scrolls history from the beginning through what the Blades understood was coming in the future. The wall depicts every major Elder Scrolls game's central events in sequence, ending with the Dragonborn's confrontation with Alduin. The Blades kept faith with this prophecy for centuries. Through long periods when dragons were gone from the world and the Dragonborn gift had not appeared, they maintained their watch. They trained, they preserved their lore, they kept their equipment, they stayed ready for a crisis that might not come in their lifetime, or their children's lifetimes, or their children's children's lifetimes. Because the wall told them it would come eventually. And then the Great War happened. The Thalmor, as part of their strategic campaign against the Empire, did not simply demand that the Blades disband as a condition of the White Gold Concordat. They had already spent years before the war's end systematically identifying and eliminating blade agents wherever they found them. The Thalmor ambassador, upon the Emperor's rejection of the Dominion's initial ultimatum, upended a cart in the imperial court and spilled onto the floor the heads of every blades agent who had been stationed in Aldmeri territory. The Great War began with a pile of severed heads that represented the Empire's intelligence capability in the Dominion. By the time the war ended and the Concordat was signed, the Blades had been reduced from a continent-spanning organization with hundreds of operatives to a tiny handful of survivors scattered in hiding. Delphine and Esbern are not paranoid because they have a naturally suspicious temperament. They are paranoid because every single colleague they ever had was hunted down and killed, and the hunting did not stop when the war ended. The Thalmor still actively seek out Blade survivors in the Fourth Era. Being a Blade in Skyrim's time period is genuinely, continuously dangerous. This context completely reframes how you should understand their urgency in the main quest. When Delphine pushes you so hard to move quickly, to trust no one, to maintain secrecy about what you are doing, she is not being dramatically intense for no reason. She is applying the lessons of watching an entire organization be systematically exterminated, and she is terrified of making any mistake that gets the last two members of the Blades killed before the Dragonborn can do what needs doing. Her demand that you kill Paarthurnax is, in this light, less about simple bloodlust and more about an organizational survival instinct that cannot accommodate nuance. The Blades were dragon hunters. If they stop being dragon hunters, if they make exceptions for good dragons, they lose their organizational purpose, and with it the justification for the enormous personal cost of being a Blade. Paarthurnax is not merely a dragon she wants dead. He is the exception that would, in her view, dissolve the entire principle that has kept her and Esbern alive and purposeful for this long. She is wrong. But she is wrong in a way that makes complete sense given what she has survived. There is one more element of the Blades' history that deserves attention. Their armor and fighting style, the distinctive Akaviri aesthetic that makes Blade equipment look unlike anything else in Tamriel, is not simply a design choice by Bethesda's artists. It reflects the genuine foreignness of the organization's origin. The Blades never fully assimilated their visual identity into a Tamrielic aesthetic, even after centuries of operating within the Empire. Their armor is explicitly Akaviri in its design language. Their swords are Akaviri in their construction. Their martial philosophy draws directly from traditions developed on a continent most of Tamriel has never visited. This foreignness served them. An organization that looks different from the people around it is harder to compromise from within. The Blades maintained a clear identity that set them apart, even when they were most deeply embedded in imperial politics. They were always, in some sense, the outsiders who had come to serve, never entirely belonging to the thing they protected. Their Skyhaven Temple, with its Akaviri architecture and Alduin's Wall and the Blood Seal that has waited 2,000 years for a Dragonborn to open it, is the most concentrated expression of this identity. Standing in that space, reading the prophecy that was carved before your parents' parents' were born, understanding that everything depicted on that wall has come true, or is in the process of coming true, is one of the genuinely moving moments in the game, if you are paying attention. The wall ends with the Dragonborn's confrontation with Alduin, not with the victory, with the confrontation. The Akaviri who built it knew that the victory was not guaranteed. They depicted the meeting because the meeting was certain. What came after the meeting depended on the person standing in it. Part 7. The Great War, the shadow that covers everything. Everything in Skyrim happens in the shadow of the Great War, the civil war between the Stormcloaks and the Imperials, the ban on Talos worship that fuels Stormcloak grievances, the Thalmor agents who appear at your most dangerous moments, the economic depression visible in the condition of most of Skyrim's cities, the broken state of the Blades, the distrust of magic that makes the College of Winterhold so isolated. All of it flows from the Great War of the Fourth Era. The Great War began in 4 Era 171. The Aldmeri Dominion, ruled by the Thalmor, delivered a series of ultimatums to Emperor Titus Mede II. These ultimatums included the cessation of Talos worship, the ceding of large territories in southern Hammerfell, and the disbandment of the Blades. When Titus refused, the Thalmor ambassador performed the severed heads gesture we already discussed, and the invasion began. The Dominion's armies moved through Hammerfell and into Cyrodiil with a speed and efficiency that the Empire, weakened by decades of political dysfunction since the Oblivion Crisis, was not prepared to match. The imperial city itself fell in 4 Era, 174. Titus Mede II fled and joined legions in Skyrim, where many Nords had gone to help retake the capital after hearing of its fall. Then he launched a counterattack. The Battle of the Red Ring, in 4 Era 175, is one of the most significant military engagements in Elder Scrolls history. Imperial forces, using tactics borrowed from the Dominion's own playbook, surrounded the occupying Aldmeri army in Cyrodiil and systematically destroyed it. The entire Dominion force within Cyrodiil was eliminated. It was, militarily speaking, a decisive Imperial victory. And yet, the Imperial army had lost 3 full legions during the war. Its surviving soldiers had lost over half their number. The Dominion had more resources, more territory, more intact military capacity. Titus Mede II looked at the math and understood that he had won the battle but could not win the war. A continued conflict would end in imperial collapse, so he signed the White Gold Concordat. The treaty gave the Dominion almost everything they had initially demanded. Talos worship was outlawed across the Empire. Southern Hammerfell was ceded to the Dominion. The Blades were to be disbanded. Hammerfell, outraged by the terms, rejected the Concordat and was renounced as an imperial province. They spent another 5 years fighting the Dominion alone, before finally achieving a stalemate and signing their own separate treaty. The resentment generated by the Concordat across the Empire, but especially in Skyrim, cannot be overstated. The Nords had sent warriors to fight and die for the Empire, to retake the Imperial city, to push the Dominion back. They had bled for the Empire. And the Empire's response to their sacrifice was to ban the worship of the god who was, in Nordic belief, literally the founder of human civilization in Tamriel, the first emperor, the divine being who had protected humanity's ascent to cultural significance. Talos, in case you need the reminder, was Tiber Septim in his mortal life, the man who reunited Tamriel and founded the Third Empire, the man who was himself dragonborn, who used the Thuum to build an empire, who upon his death ascended to godhood and became the 9th divine. The Thalmor hate Talos worship for a very specific reason that is simultaneously political and theological. The elves of the Aldmeri Dominion believe that mortal apotheosis, humans becoming gods, is a metaphysical crime that destabilizes the fabric of Mundus. A human becoming a god means a mortal has punched through the ceiling, has achieved something that should only be possible for the original Et Ada. This cannot be allowed. Not because they simply dislike humans, though the Thalmor's politics are shot through with elven supremacist ideology, but because they believe, with genuine theological conviction, that mortal apotheosis is cosmologically catastrophic. This is a fascinating and genuinely complex conflict. The Stormcloaks are not simply nationalists throwing off an oppressive empire. They are defending, among other things, a genuine metaphysical argument about whether a human being can become a god. The empire is not simply a corrupt institution abandoning its citizens to placate foreign powers. It is making a pragmatic calculation that losing a religious freedom is preferable to losing an entire civilization. Both positions have real merit, and the Thalmor's position, while self-serving and politically motivated, is not without its own internal logic if you take their cosmological framework seriously. The deeper truth about the Great War's shadow over Skyrim, the one the main quest embeds in Thalmor embassy documents that most players rush past without reading, is this. The Thalmor did not intend the Great War to end with the White Gold Concordat. They intended it to be the beginning of total elven supremacy. The Concordat was, in their strategic calculation, not a peace treaty, but a staging post. A way to weaken the Empire, humiliate it, strip it of some of its most capable defenders, the Blades, and plant the seeds of internal conflict, the Stormcloak Rebellion, by making the Talos ban an ongoing source of grievance. Every year that the Civil War continues, both the Stormcloaks and the Empire are bleeding resources, soldiers, and political will that they would otherwise be devoting to the actual threat, the Thalmor. Every battle at Whiterun, or Windhelm, or Solitude, is soldiers who could have been defending against a second Dominion invasion. The Thalmor are playing a game that operates on a multi-generational timescale, and by the time of Skyrim's events, they are well ahead. This is the fourth major fact that rewrites the main quest. The civil war you can choose to engage with or ignore during the game is not a distraction from the real story. It is a deliberately manufactured conflict designed to ensure that whether Alduin is defeated or not, whether the Dragonborn succeeds or fails, Skyrim and the Empire emerge from the Dragon Crisis too weakened to resist the Thalmor's long-term plans. The villain of Skyrim's main quest is Alduin, but the villain of the political story woven around it is an elven supremacist government that has been patiently engineering the collapse of human civilization for decades, and they are not even present in the main quest's final act. Part 8. Miraak, the First and the Cautionary Tale. The Dragonborn DLC revealed something about the nature of the Dovahkiin that the main game only hinted at. There was a Dragonborn before you, a long time before you, and what happened to him is a warning about what the Dragonborn gift costs when it is used without wisdom. Miraak, whose name in the dragon language means allegiance guide, was a dragon priest in the Merethic era, specifically on the island of Solstheim. He was, based on the lore accounts, extraordinarily powerful, even among dragon priests, and uniquely positioned within the cult hierarchy. He was also, unknown to anyone, Dragonborn. The ability to absorb dragon souls, which all Dragonborn possess, first manifested in Miraak. He was the first mortal to discover that killing a dragon and absorbing its soul was possible. He was the first to understand what that ability meant, what it could do, and unlike later Dragonborn, who used this power in service of defeating Alduin and protecting Tamriel, Miraak immediately recognized it as leverage. He sought out Hermaeus Mora, the Daedric Prince of Forbidden Knowledge, the entity who collects secrets the way others collect coins, who has been watching the world accumulate knowledge since before the current era of creation. Miraak found a black book, one of the dark artifacts Hermaeus Mora uses to lure scholars and ambitious mortals into his service, and through it made contact with the prince. The deal they struck was, from a certain perspective, perfectly characteristic of Hermaeus Mora. Miraak would receive power, specifically the Bend Will Shout, which allows the user to dominate the minds of both humans and dragons. In exchange, Miraak would serve Hermaeus Mora, becoming his champion, residing eventually in Apocrypha, the prince's realm of endless forbidden libraries. What Miraak did with this power was dramatic. He used Bend Will to rebel against the dragons, breaking free of the cult's hierarchy and establishing himself as an independent power on Solstheim. He recruited other dragon priests to his cause, built his own temple, and began accumulating his own following. He refused to help the ancient Nordic heroes in their fight against Alduin, which is an interesting choice that the lore treats as a significant moral failure. He had the power to potentially tip the Dragon War decisively in humanity's favor. He chose not to use it because his goals were personal, not cosmic. Other loyal dragon priests eventually moved against him. The most powerful, a priest named Valak, who was himself extraordinarily capable, confronted Miraak and defeated him in a battle so catastrophic, as mentioned in the transcript's source material, that it literally reshaped Solstheim's geography. Their clash ripped the island away from Skyrim's northeastern coast, creating the sea channel that now separates them. When Valak was about to deliver the killing blow, Hermaeus Mora intervened. He pulled Miraak into Apocrypha, saving his champion's life. And then Miraak was trapped. He had made a deal with the Prince of Forbidden Knowledge. He had received what he asked for. He had survived. He was safe in Apocrypha, in an infinite library full of the most dangerous and comprehensive knowledge in existence. And he could not leave. Not without another Dragonborn appearing who he could potentially use to escape. Not without a specific, elaborate sequence of events that required patience on a truly inhuman scale. He waited in Apocrypha for thousands of years. The Dragon War ended. The Dragon Cult fell. The Riemann dynasty rose and fell. The Septim dynasty rose and fell. The Oblivion Crisis happened and was resolved. The Great War happened and ended. All of this time, Miraak existed in the endless stacks of Hermaeus Mora's realm, reading, accumulating knowledge, plotting, and waiting. By the time you arrive in the Fourth Era, he has been in Apocrypha for somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 years. He is not simply powerful, he is saturated with forbidden knowledge in ways that are difficult to even conceptualize. He has had millennia to understand every implication of every text in the most comprehensive library in existence. He is, by any reasonable measure, the most knowledgeable mortal being who has ever existed. And he is desperate. Genuinely, deeply, achingly desperate to be free. When you begin the Dragonborn DLC, you are not simply dealing with a new villain who has appeared conveniently. You are encountering the resolution of a story that has been running since the Dragon War. Mirak's cultists attacking you are his attempt to use your death and your dragon soul to power his return. When he steals dragon souls from you throughout the DLC, preventing you from absorbing them, he is doing something that is both power accumulation and a direct attack on the thing that makes you the Dragonborn, your connection to the cycle of dragon souls. The confrontation in Apocrypha, when you finally face Mirak at the summit of the realm, is one of the most loaded encounters in the game, if you understand the context. Two Dragonborn in the realm of the Daedric Prince, who has been watching, and in his way collecting, both of them. Mirak says to you, before the fight, that Hermaeus Mora arranged this, that the prince always intended to eventually replace his first champion with a newer, fresher one, that Mirak had always known, at some level, that the deal he made in the Merethic era would eventually come due in exactly this way. He is not entirely wrong about Hermaeus Mora's nature. The Prince of Knowledge does not care about the individuals in his service. He cares about what they know and what they can discover. A Dragonborn who has been accumulating power and knowledge for thousands of years is valuable. But a Dragonborn who is freshly motivated, connected to the current era, able to move through the world in ways a trapped prisoner cannot, is more valuable for certain purposes. Hermaeus Mora traded Mirak for you as casually as you might upgrade a tool. The ending of the Dragonborn DLC, after you absorb Mirak's soul, is remarkable for its implications. Hermaeus Mora immediately informs you that you are now his champion, that you have earned great rewards, that you should serve him faithfully. He does not ask, he tells you. He frames the outcome of your mission to defeat Mirak as having simultaneously been a mission to replace Mirak as the prince's servant. You can simply ignore this. The game allows you to walk away from Apocrypha, not return, and proceed with the rest of Skyrim as if none of this happened. But the lore implication is sitting there regardless. The last Dragonborn, who absorbed the soul of the first Dragonborn, is now technically the champion of the Daedric Prince of Forbidden Knowledge. Whether you act on that or not, Hermaeus Mora has claimed you in the same way he claimed Mirak thousands of years ago. Some lore scholars believe this is the real ending of the Dragonborn story, not the defeat of Alduin. That happens partway through a process that culminates in the last Dragonborn becoming, whether they intend it or not, another piece in Hermaeus Mora's collection. Part 9. Sovngarde, the afterlife under siege. Let us go somewhere beautiful and discuss why what is happening there is a horror. Sovngarde is the Nordic afterlife. In the cosmology of the Nords, the worthy dead, those who fought with courage, who lived with honor, who died in ways befitting a warrior, go to Sovngarde. Specifically, they go to the Hall of Valor, which is presented in the lore as a massive mead hall built by the god Shor, who is the Nordic interpretation of the divine principle that is Lorcan in other cultures. The deity who was most associated with the creation of Mundus, and therefore with humanity's place in the cosmos, the Hall of Valor, is extraordinary. Time has no meaning within it. Pain and illness dissolve at the threshold. The honored dead feast, sing, spar, and exist in a state of perpetual joyful celebration. You can find there, in the game's main quest, the three ancient heroes who created Dragonrend, Hakon One-Eye, Feldir the Old, and Gormlaith Golden Hilt. They have been there for thousands of years, technically, but within the hall, that duration is simply the length of a very good party. The Hall of Valor is built on a whalebone bridge, guarded by Sun, the Nordic god of trials against adversity, Shor's shield thane. To enter, you must prove your worth by fighting him. He does not fight to kill, he fights to evaluate. If you can hold your own against a divine being who has been doing this since before the First Era, you have demonstrated sufficient martial virtue to be admitted to the realm of heroes. This is important context for what Alduin is doing there. When Alduin returns and begins raising his army, he does not go to Sovngarde because it happens to be convenient. He goes there because Sovngarde is the most concentrated pool of heroic Nordic souls in existence, and dragon souls feed on other souls. By cloaking Sovngarde in a magical mist that prevents the dead within it from reaching the Hall of Valor, by trapping newly arrived souls in the fog, where they cannot find sanctuary, Alduin is creating a feeding ground. He is hunting the honored dead of thousands of years of Nordic history. Every soul Alduin devours in Sovngarde makes him stronger. And these are not ordinary souls. These are, by definition, the best warriors in Nordic history, the people who lived and fought hard enough to reach the Hall of Valor. Alduin is not just eating people, he is eating history. He is consuming the cultural legacy of an entire civilization. He is doing this for power, of course, but there is a secondary implication that the main quest steps past too quickly. What happens to souls that Alduin eats? In the lore, Alduin consuming souls is not a temporary state. He is not holding them in reserve. He is destroying them in a way that is permanent, in a way that removes them from the cycle of souls entirely. The honored dead of Nordic civilization, the heroes who were promised an eternal reward by their culture's most sacred beliefs, are being permanently erased. This is, among other things, an attack on the meaning of Nordic life. If dying heroically no longer guarantees Sovngarde, if Alduin can simply devour the reward at the end of the path that Nords are taught to walk, then the entire framework of values that Nordic culture is built on is under siege. It is not just that brave people are being eaten, it is that the concept of dying bravely has been made meaningless. When the Dragonborn arrives in Sovngarde through the portal at Skuldafn, via the dragon Odahviing's help, the situation they encounter is a realm under siege. The mist is thick and disorientating. Alduin circles overhead in the fog, hunting. The souls who have recently arrived, but have not yet reached the Hall of Valor, are wandering, lost, terrified. Some of them will be caught before you can help them. If you try to guide a Stormcloak soldier you encounter in the mist, the lore makes a quiet, devastating point. He will be eaten by Alduin before you reach safety. The experience of losing someone in Sovngarde's fog makes the stakes of the final confrontation viscerally real in a way that no amount of exposition could achieve. Inside the Hall of Valor, the ancient heroes understand what must be done. Hakon, Feldir, and Gormlaith know Alduin. They pressed pause on him thousands of years ago and have been waiting, in the middle of a feast, for the moment when someone would arrive who could finish the job properly. They are genuinely glad to see you, not with the forced enthusiasm of NPCs designed to be helpful, with the specific gladness of people who have been waiting a very long time for something they were promised would eventually happen. Together, you and the three ancient heroes confront Alduin in Sovngarde's sky. The battle, in terms of the cosmic story we have been following all evening, is the moment when the function of the Dragonborn, the born hunter of dragonkind, meets the function of Alduin, the firstborn of Akatosh meant to end the world. It is not simply a boss fight. It is the resolution of a cosmological conflict that began before history was recorded and has been in play through thousands of years of mortal suffering. When Alduin is finally defeated, his soul does not disperse the way an ordinary dragon's does. He does not die in the way mortals or even other dragons die. His defeat in Sovngarde is more of a dismissal, a rejection by the universe, an ending of his self-appointed tyranny without the finality that would come from simply destroying him. Paarthurnax says, afterward, that Alduin's defeat does not mean he is gone forever. His essential nature, the cosmic function of world ending, persists. It must persist, because the universe needs it. But it has been separated from his corrupted personal ambition, from the Tyler Septim-style imperial project he was running, instead of doing his assigned job. Whether Alduin eventually returns to properly fulfill his cosmic function, ending this Kalpa and allowing the next one to begin, is left deliberately unresolved. The Elder Scrolls universe does not promise salvation in the conventional sense. It promises function. The machine will eventually do what it is designed to do. You have not prevented the end of the world. You have just ensured that the end of the world, when it comes on the universe's schedule, rather than one selfish dragon's personal timeline. Part 10. The Dragon Language, when words are reality. There is a moment in the throat of the world, the first time you meet Paarthurnax, where he demonstrates what the Dovazul, the dragon language, truly is by incinerating a section of snow around him while simply talking. He is not casting a spell. He is not performing a ritual. He is speaking conversationally, in his own language, and the world responds to his voice by burning. The dragon language is not a language in the conventional sense. Human languages describe reality. Dovazul creates it. This distinction is fundamental to understanding what the thuam, the voice, actually is, and why it operates so differently from conventional magic. When a mage casts a fireball spell in Skyrim, they are using learned techniques to channel magical energy from Aetherius through their body and shape it into a specific effect. The magic is external to them. They are a conduit. The technique is a tool. When a dragon speaks Dovazul, or when a dragonborn uses the thuam, they are not using a tool. They are using a language whose words, when spoken by a being with the right essential nature, do not describe fire or force or frost. They manifest it. The word Yol does not mean fire and then cause fire to appear. It is fire, expressed as sound, reality condensed into vocalization. The speaking of it and the existence of the flame are the same act. This is why the Greybeards maintain near total silence at High Hrothgar. It is not mystical posturing. It is genuine safety. A Greybeard speaking casually in Dovazul would reshape the environment around them with every sentence. Not because they are especially powerful compared to other users of the voice, though they are extremely powerful, but because Dovazul does not have casual registers. Every word is equally potent. There is no such thing as a whisper in the dragon language that does not have the full weight of reality shaping behind it. When the Greybeards summon you to High Hrothgar, you hear and feel it across the entire province. Every NPC in the game has some reaction to it. Guards mention hearing something. Jarls discuss it. Common folk are unsettled. This is not simply a dramatic game mechanic designed to convey importance. The shout the Greybeards used to call you was the most restrained version of their power they could deploy for this purpose, the absolute minimum necessary. The fact that even that minimum was felt across an entire province gives you some sense of what they are capable of. The phrase the Greybeards use for their summons, Dovahkiin, your name spoken in the dragon language, is also notable. Your name in Dovazul, as we discussed earlier, is not merely a title. It is a description of your essential nature, a description of your function. Shouting your name is, in a cosmological sense, calling the function into being, summoning the born hunter of dragonkind with the word that defines them. Paarthurnax's name, Ambition Overlord Cruelty, when spoken by another dragon in Dovazul, is not an insult. It is a statement of nature. Dragon names in Dovazul do not describe what you are called. They describe what you are. This is why Paarthurnax's self-chosen name is such a profound act of self-awareness. He looked at what he was and gave himself a name that would never let him forget it. The implications for the word walls scattered across Skyrim are equally interesting. These stone monuments, carved with words of power that the Dragonborn learns by approaching and reading them, are not simply inscriptions. They are, in a specific lore sense, storage devices. Because Dovazul creates reality when spoken by the right being, writing it down is a way of preserving potency in dormant form. The words on a wall are not inactive. They are loaded. They await a being capable of activating them by experiencing them. This is why only the Dragonborn can learn from word walls in the way they do. Other mortals can study Dovazul academically and learn to speak words that produce effects, but the learning process is enormously slow, requiring years of meditation to master a single word. The Dragonborn experiences the word at a word wall and immediately understands it at a cellular level because their draconic soul can process Dovazul as its native language. The word walls are not teaching the Dragonborn. They are reminding them of something that is already, on some level, part of what they are. The ancient Nords who carved these walls understood this. They were not creating monuments to their own martial victories, though the walls do mark battle sites. They were preserving reality-shaping technology in the most stable medium available, stone, in formats that would remain potent for thousands of years, specifically for the moment when a Dragonborn would arrive who needed to access this accumulated knowledge quickly. Every word wall in Skyrim is a gift from the dead to the living, from warriors who used the voice to fight dragons to a descendant who would need to use it to fight the original dragon. The Dragonwren's shout, the one that forces Alduin to the ground, has an interesting relationship with all of this. It cannot be carved on a word wall. It cannot be stored as dormant potential in stone. Because Dragonrend is made from mortal anguish and mortal perspective, things that are not constants, but states of consciousness. To experience Dragonrend at a word wall would require the wall to contain lived experience, not just knowledge. It would require the wall to make you feel something rather than understand something. Instead, you learn Dragonrend by experiencing it in the past. Through the Elder Scroll, at the summit of the throat of the world where the time wound exists, you witness the moment of Dragonrend's creation. You are present, in a temporal echo, when the three ancient heroes first speak the words that force Alduin out of the sky thousands of years before your birth. You absorb the shout not from a stone inscription, but from being, momentarily, present at its origin. The time wound itself deserves a moment. When the ancient Nords used the Elder Scroll to displace Alduin through time, they created a scar in the fabric of temporal reality at the summit of the throat of the world. Time does not flow normally there. Past, present, and future intersect in unstable ways. The magical properties of the snow at the mountain's peak, the snow that never melts, regardless of temperature, are a direct consequence of this wound. The Greybeards choose their monastery there, not just because of the mountain's sacredness or its difficulty of access, but because the temporal anomaly focuses their meditation in ways that would not be possible elsewhere. The Elder Scroll that was used in the banishment is still there. It has been there for thousands of years. When you retrieve it and use it on the time wound during the main quest, you are not using a generic, powerful artifact. You are using the specific tool that created the wound to access what the wound preserved, the moment of the original banishment. The Elder Scroll does not show you the past because it is a magical recording device. It shows you the past because the time wound has been holding that moment intact, and the scroll that made the wound is the key that opens it. Part 11. The Elder Scrolls themselves reading the unreadable. The Elder Scrolls are the strangest and most philosophically complex artifacts in the Elder Scrolls universe. This is appropriate given that the series is named after them. Their nature and function are things the lore deliberately leaves partially undefined, because the Elder Scrolls are, in the lore, objects that resist definition. They are ancient. No one knows who created them or when. They predate the gods in some interpretations, or they exist outside time entirely in others. The Moth Priests, who devote their lives to reading the scrolls, eventually go blind from the process. The blindness is not a side effect of an injury. It is the result of having looked at too much. The scrolls contain everything, past, present, and future, simultaneously, not in sequence, not in a format that a mortal mind can process without cost. Looking at an Elder Scroll is like looking directly at the structure of causality itself, and human eyes are not built for that view. The blindness that comes from reading Elder Scrolls is specifically understood in the lore as a gift in disguise. Blind Moth Priests can perceive the meaning within the scrolls more clearly than sighted readers, because their physical sight no longer competes with the deeper perception the scrolls require. The loss of external vision opens space for the internal vision needed to parse what the scrolls actually contain. For the Dragonborn, reading an Elder Scroll without years of Moth Priest training is catastrophic. You go temporarily blind. The game renders this as a screen effect and a brief darkness. The lore renders it as exactly what the Moth Priests experience over the course of a lifetime, compressed into a single unbearable moment. You are looking at too much at once, and your eyes pay for it. What the scrolls contain is not simply records or prophecies in the conventional sense. The information within them does not exist in a linear format. The scroll you use at the time wound does not say, in any language, here is a recording of Alduin's banishment, play it now. It contains the event itself, or something close enough to the event that the distinction may not matter. When you read it at the time wound, you do not watch a film of the past. You are, briefly and completely, in the past. The three heroes are present. Alduin is present. The shout is spoken. You learn it because you experience the moment of its creation. The Elder Scrolls are not history books. They are windows into something that has no proper name in any mortal language. The nearest approximation is everything, all possibilities, all outcomes, all moments simultaneously perceived, held in a form that can be accessed but not contained or fully understood. Septimus Cygnus, the half-mad scholar you meet in his isolated outpost near Winterhold, has spent his life studying a single Dwemer device, trying to decipher its meaning with an Elder Scrolls help. His obsession is presented in the game as the amusing eccentricity of a man who has been alone in the ice for too long. The lore understands it as the final stage of a brilliant mind that has looked too deeply into too much knowledge, as what happens when someone devotes themselves entirely to understanding something that was not designed for mortal understanding. He does not find wisdom at the end of his obsession. He finds Hermaeus Mora, as anyone who looks too deeply into forbidden knowledge eventually does. Part 12. The fates left open what the main quest cannot tell you. There is a convention in storytelling where the end of the story is also the answer to every question the story raised. The hero wins, the villain is defeated, the world is restored, everything is resolved. Skyrim does not work this way. The main quest ends Alduin's immediate threat, but it leaves most of the actual world's problems exactly as they were when you arrived at Helgen. The civil war is unresolved unless you engaged with it. If you did, one side won, but the winning side's victory does not solve the underlying problem. An imperial victory preserves the Talos ban and the conditions that created Stormcloak grievances. A Stormcloak victory creates an independent Skyrim that is now isolated from imperial support and weakened by the war, exactly the outcome the Thalmor were engineering. The Thalmor are still operating. Their agents are still active in Skyrim. Their strategic goals, weakening humanity and engineering the conditions for eventual Aldmeri dominance, are entirely undamaged by the defeat of Alduin. In fact, the Dragon Crisis may have served their purposes in certain respects, keeping attention focused on an immediate catastrophic threat while their longer game continued undisturbed. Paarthurnax, if you spared him, has begun his attempt to reform the surviving dragons. How this goes is unknown. The game does not tell you. Dragons are still present in Skyrim after the main quest ends, appearing occasionally as random encounters. Some of them are clearly under Paarthurnax's influence in later Radiant dialogue. Some of them are clearly not. Whether his project succeeds or fails is a story that is still being written in the timeline the game occupies. The Greybeards remain at High Hrothgar. Their order continues. Their philosophy, the Way of the Voice, which is the entire tradition that made defeating Alduin possible, persists. But they are few, and their influence on the world is deliberately limited by their own philosophy. They will not use their power for political purposes. They will not recruit aggressively. They will meditate, practice, and wait, as they always have. The College of Winterhold is still regarded with deep suspicion by most of Skyrim. The Great Collapse that destroyed most of Winterhold and left the college standing mysteriously untouched is still blamed on the college by the remaining townspeople, despite no evidence supporting this. The college's isolation will continue. Its access to knowledge that could help Skyrim face whatever comes next will continue to be limited by the province's distrust of magic and mages. The companions in Whiterun are in an interesting place after their questline. The Circle, the inner group, has been cured of lycanthropy through the Dragonborn's assistance if you completed that questline, or not, depending on your choices. The organization is intact, its reputation maintained, its founding history as a retribution army against the Snow Elves, now so thoroughly buried under centuries of institutional evolution that almost no one remembers it. The Dark Brotherhood, if you completed their questline, is either destroyed or rebuilding from a tiny remnant. Their theology, the worship of Sithis as the primal void of change and entropy, continues in whatever members remain. Their connection to the Night Mother, the mummified founder whose preserved body still somehow communicates contracts, persists. Whether the Brotherhood can survive in the long term depends on factors the game leaves entirely open. The fate of the last Dragonborn themselves is the most deliberately ambiguous unresolution of all. Unlike previous Elder Scrolls protagonists whose fates are eventually documented in later games, the last Dragonborn leaves no clear historical record after the defeat of Alduin. They simply disappear from the documented history of Tamriel. There are several interpretations the lore allows. In one, the Dragonborn retires to a normal life, their cosmic function fulfilled, their extraordinary nature finally at rest. In another, they remain as a quiet guardian, appearing when needed, accumulating dragon souls and shout knowledge as Alduin continues to try to reassemble himself in whatever form remains of him. In the Hermaeus Mora interpretation, they eventually end up in Apocrypha, Not imprisoned exactly, but certainly present, the prince's newest champion among his infinite stacks of forbidden texts. In the darkest interpretation, one that certain lore scholars find compelling precisely because of how the Dragonborn DLC ends, the last Dragonborn, having absorbed Mirok's soul, is now carrying both their own dragon soul and the accumulated experience of the first Dragonborn, a being who spent thousands of years in the service of Hermaeus Mora, accumulating knowledge that no mortal mind was designed to hold. The implications of what that does to a person over time are left entirely to the imagination. What we can say with confidence is this: the main quest of Skyrim is not a story that ends when the credits roll. It is a story that reaches a significant milestone and then continues in directions the game cannot follow. The Dragonborn lives in a world that has been changed by what they did, but not fixed by it. The people of Skyrim will wake up the morning after Alduin's defeat and deal with the same cold and the same politics and the same grinding poverty in Riften and the same racism in Windhelm and the same brewing conflict with the deaf Thalmor. The dragon in the sky is gone, but the wolf is still at the door. This is, ultimately, what the lore is asking you to sit with. Not a neat resolution, but an honest one. The world was saved in the specific way it needed saving. Everything else is still your problem, still everyone's problem, still the ongoing, unresolved work of civilization, trying to be better than it has been. The cosmological machinery is running correctly again. The human project, the messy, violent, hopeful, cruel, generous human project, continues exactly as it always has. The main quest of Skyrim is genuinely one of the most quietly philosophical things in games. Not because it has long cutscenes explaining its themes or characters who deliver speeches about meaning, but because its themes are simply present, embedded in the design choices, in the fact that your victory does not restore the cities, or stop the war, or feed the hungry children in Riften. The game trusts you to notice. It trusts you to sit with the gap between what was fixed and what remains to be fixed, between the cosmic and the ordinary, between the Dragonborn's singular deed and the thousand deeds no prophecy will ever describe that must happen for the world to actually be good. Part 13. 160 specific lore facts gathered and unpacked. We have been walking through the architecture of Skyrim's main story, pulling back the walls and looking at what they are made of. Now let us go fact by fact, 1 through 160, through specific pieces of lore that genuinely change how the story reads if you know them. Some of these we have covered at length. Some of these deserve their own moment in the light. 1. Alduin's name means Destroyer, Devour, Master in the dragon language. He named himself for his function. It is not a title bestowed by others in fear. It is a self-identification. 2. Alduin was created before linear time began, along with all other dragons. He did not enter existence through normal processes. He is, in the most literal sense, a being as old as time itself. 3. The ancient Nords worshipped Alduin as the god of time before they understood what he had become. Their earliest religious practices were, unknowingly, a form of cosmic tribute to the universe's reset mechanism. 4. Paarthurnax's name, Ambition Overlord Cruelty, is his own self-chosen title. He selected words that describe what he was before his defection so that he would never forget. 5. The throat of the world is not simply the highest mountain in Tamriel. It is a literal wound in time, a scar left by the Elder Scroll displacement of Alduin that has made the location a point where temporal anomalies occur naturally. 6. The snow at the summit of the throat of the world never melts, regardless of temperature, because of the magical residue of the time wound. It is not weather, it is metaphysics. 7. The White Phial, that artifact of purification and amplification you find through a side quest, draws its power from the magical cold at the summit of the throat of the world. The two are connected in the lore. 8. Dragonrend was not simply discovered or learned. It was invented. The three ancient heroes created it from nothing, from pure mortal experience. It was the first word of power crafted by mortals rather than drawn from dragon knowledge. 9. Dragonrend cannot be written on a word wall because it contains subjective experience, specifically mortal fear and fragility, rather than objective knowledge. 10. The time wound at the summit of the throat of the world allows a specific temporal overlap that makes it possible for you to briefly exist in the moment of Alduin's original banishment. You do not watch history. You briefly inhabit it. 11. The Elder Scroll used to banish Alduin has been at the summit of the throat of the world for thousands of years, waiting. It is the same scroll that created the time wound. The key was left at the wound it made. 12. Mirok preceded all other named Dragonborn in the ability to absorb dragon souls. He was the first to discover this capability and the first to understand its implications. 13. Mirok actively refused to help the ancient Nordic heroes against Alduin during the Dragon War. He had the power to potentially end the war much earlier. He chose personal ambition over cosmic responsibility. 14. The battle between Mirok and Valak was so catastrophic that it physically separated Solstheim from the Skyrim mainland. Their fight literally reshaped geography. 15. Mirok has been an apocrypha for somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 years. He is the oldest living dragonborn by an extraordinary margin. 16. When Hermaeus Mora kills Mirok during your confrontation in Apocrypha, the prince immediately informs you that you are now his champion. The framing is not a reward, it is a claim. 17. The Blades originated as the Akaviri Dragon Guard, an army of dragon hunters from a mysterious eastern continent who invaded Tamriel specifically searching for a dragonborn. 18. The Akaviri forces did not surrender to Reman Cyrodiil because he defeated them militarily. They stopped fighting the moment he shouted, recognized him as the dragonborn they had been seeking, and pledged service. 19. Reman Cyrodiil did not call himself emperor in his lifetime. The title was bestowed posthumously. He ruled as a dragonborn king, not as the founder of a dynasty in his own self-identification. 20. Alduin's Wall was built inside Skyhaven Temple over a period of roughly 6 years, completed in the year 1 era 2818, during the reign of Reman II. It was always intended as both a historical record and a prophecy. 21. Alduin's Wall depicts events from every Elder Scrolls game in sequence, from Arena through to Skyrim. The game's main quest ending was, in the lore, predicted and depicted on a wall built thousands of years before it happened. 22. The blood seal on Skyhaven Temple, the door that only a dragonborn's blood can open, was consecrated by Emperor Reman II in the presence of the entire Akaviri Dragon Guard. It has been waiting for a dragonborn to open it for over 2,000 years. 23. The White Gold Concordat was signed in 4 era 175. Its terms were effectively identical to the demands the Thalmor had made before the war, which the Empire had rejected and fought 4 years to deny. They signed at the end of a war they had technically won the final battle of. 24. The Thalmor presented severed heads of every Blades agent in the Aldmeri Dominion when the Emperor refused their initial ultimatum. This single act essentially ended the Blades' intelligence capability in Elven territory before the war had officially started. 25. Hammerfell rejected the White Gold Concordat, was renounced as an imperial province, and fought the Aldmeri Dominion alone for another 5 years. They achieved a stalemate and a separate peace. They remain independent and deeply resentful of the Empire. 26. The Stormcloak Rebellion was, according to Thalmor documents found in the embassy, a predictable and desired consequence of the Concordat. Banning Talos worship in Skyrim was always going to generate exactly this conflict. 27. Ulfric Stormcloak is described in Thalmor embassy documents as an unwitting asset. He is not working for the Thalmor. He does not know he is serving their interests. His authentic passion for Nordic independence makes him the perfect tool. 28. The Thalmor do not want either side to win the civil war. Their ideal outcome is perpetual conflict that bleeds both the Empire and Skyrim without resolution. 29. The dragon priests who guard tombs throughout Skyrim were each bonded to a specific dragon patron, not to Alduin as an organization. Their masks were personal gifts from their individual patron dragon. 30. The 8 high-ranking dragon priests functioned as a governing council at Labyrinthian, settling territorial disputes between their dragon patrons and managing the dragon cult's administration. 31. Labyrinthian, the maze-like ruin in Hjalmark, was once called Brumjunar and served as the administrative capital of the dragon cult's theocracy. The confusion of its modern layout reflects thousands of years of structural decay and repurposing. 32. The dragon cult's last holdout at Forelhost chose mass suicide over surrender in 1 era 139. King Harold's forces breached the walls to find only corpses. An entire ideological movement quietly extinguished itself. 33. The Draugr that guard dragon burial mounds and Nordic tombs are, in the lore, former dragon cult members who entered a death-like state voluntarily to guard dragon remains until Alduin's return. They have been in that state for thousands of years. 34. The dragon burial mounds scattered across Skyrim were actively maintained by the cult's faithful for thousands of years after the Dragon War ended, in preparation for Alduin's resurrection of his army. 35. When Alduin lands at a burial mound and raises a dragon in the main quest, he is activating a storage system the dragon cult maintained, specifically for this purpose. 36. The Greybeards were founded by Jurgen Windcaller after the Battle of Red Mountain, in which Nordic tongues were devastated despite their mastery of the voice. He interpreted the defeat as a message about the Thuum's misuse and developed the Way of the Voice in response. 37. Jurgen Windcaller spent a full 7 years in meditation, developing the philosophy that would become the Way of the Voice before he began teaching it. The formation of the Greybeards as an institution was the result of decades of his solitary contemplation. 38. The Greybeards do not refuse to use the Thuum in combat because they are cowards or pacifists in any conventional sense. They refuse because they proved, through the Battle of Red Mountain, that treating reality-altering power as a casual weapon dishonors the gift and produces catastrophic results. 39. The 4 Greybeards you meet at High Hrothgar, Arngir, Bori, Einarth, and Wulfgar each know only 6 shouts. Arngir specifically knows Disarm, Fire Breath, Frost Breath, Ice Form, Unrelenting Force, and Whirlwind Sprint. They have deliberately limited themselves. 40. The Greybeards have only 2 points of health each. This is not a game balance decision. It reflects the reality that they would never fight. If you somehow made them hostile and killed one, you would have done it in 2 hits. The most powerful practitioners of the voice in the world, and they have the physical resilience of a startled rabbit. 41. When the Greybeards summon the Dragonborn by shouting your name across Skyrim, every NPC in the province has a unique reaction to it. This is not flavor text. In the lore, even the restrained summons shout was powerful enough to be felt as a physical event across the entire province. 42. The College of Winterhold exists because the Mages Guild that spanned all of Tamriel in the 2nd and 3rd eras eventually collapsed due to corruption, infighting, and catastrophic magical disasters that destroyed public trust in organized magical scholarship. 43. The great collapse that destroyed most of Winterhold and left the college standing happened in 4 Era 98, roughly 100 years before Skyrim's events. The cause is unknown. The college is blamed by the townspeople despite no evidence supporting this. 44. Ancano, the Thalmor agent at the college, is not simply a spy. He is specifically positioned to find and acquire the Eye of Magnus, which the Thalmor believe could give them control over the fundamental rules governing how magic works in Tamriel. 45. The Staff of Magnus was crafted by Magnus himself before his flight from Mundus. It is not an artifact created by mortals, or even by mortal magic. It is a tool of a god, left behind when he fled through the hole in reality that became the sun. 46. The Eye of Magnus predates the current world. It is likely a remnant from a previous Kalpa, a fragment of a universe that ended before the current one began. This is why it resists classification, and why its activation threatens to tear reality apart. 47. The Sigic Order, the ancient mages who intervened during the college questline, have existed since the Merethic era. Their island of Artaeum sometimes disappears from the world entirely, removing itself from normal spacetime. When they appear to help, it signals events of truly cosmic importance. 48. The Sigic Order's ability to freeze time and walk through stopped moments is treated as casually by them as walking through a door. They represent a level of magical attainment so far beyond the college that the comparison is almost meaningless. 49. The Augur of Dunlane, the disembodied magical consciousness in the college's basement, was once a human student named Dunlane. His curiosity about powers beyond his understanding destroyed his physical form and left him as pure magical energy. He is, in essence, the college's warning about magical ambition without wisdom. 50. Sovngarde exists in Aetherius, the divine realm from which magical power flows. It is not simply an afterlife. It is a pocket of the original divine state of being, created specifically for Nordic heroes by Sjor. 51. Soon, the guardian of the Whalebone Bridge in Sovngarde is a genuine deity, Sjor's shield thane. When you fight him to prove your worth, you are fighting a god in single combat. He is not fighting to kill, he is evaluating. 52. Gormlaith Golden Hilt, one of the 3 ancient heroes you encounter in the Hall of Valor, was known in her time as the most aggressive and ferociously skilled warrior among the 3 who confronted Alduin. She was the one who most directly expressed the rage and hatred that gave Dragonrend its power. 53. Hakon One-Eye had doubts about using the Elder Scroll to displace Alduin, believing that sending him forward in time was cowardly and that they should have found a way to destroy him. Feldir the Old argued that destruction was impossible and that displacement was necessary. Hakon never fully made his peace with the decision. 54. The souls of every dragonborn in history are found in the Hall of Valor, according to some of the random hero NPCs you encounter there, who mention being dragonborn themselves. The Hall contains the accumulated dragonborn heritage of all of Nordic history. 55. Alduin, when flying through Sovngarde's mist, is not simply hunting randomly. He is specifically targeting souls who are trying to reach the Hall of Valor. He is attacking the path to safety, not the destination. 56. If you attempt to guide a soul through Sovngarde's mist, the game allows Alduin to devour that soul in a way that is permanent. This is one of the few moments in the game where your actions can lead to a permanent loss that is not just a game mechanic, but has actual lore weight. 57. The dragon language, Dovazul, is not a language invented by Bethesda's writing team without structure. It has consistent grammar, vocabulary, and phonological rules. Over 300 unique words exist in the in-game language. 58. The language creates reality when spoken by a being with the right essential nature, not through learned technique, but through the fundamental nature of what a dragon is. The word is not a description of a thing. It is the thing, expressed as sound. 59. The shout kind's peace, which calms animals, is not simply a magical effect. In the dragon language, it expresses the concept of peaceful divine presence in a way that resonates with the natural world at a level below conscious response. 60. The shout Call of Valor, which summons one of the 3 ancient heroes to fight alongside you, is remarkable because it is a call across death itself. You are not summoning ghosts or echoes. You are briefly pulling genuine presences from Sovngarde into the mortal world. 61. Ancient Nords used the Thuum for peaceful purposes as extensively as for warfare. Shouts existed for healing, agriculture, communication, construction, and artistic expression. The reduction of the Thuum to combat applications represents a cultural loss of enormous proportions. 62. The Way of the Voice did not eliminate the Thuum from Nordic culture by force. It did so through persuasion over centuries, gradually reframing the voice as a gift for worship rather than a weapon, until the cultural memory of its peaceful applications faded. 63. Dovahkiin, translated literally as a 3-word dragon name rather than a compound title, means born hunter of dragonkind. The universe named you for your function before you were born. 64. The Dragonborn gift cannot be inherited. It is a direct gift from Akatosh that appears in specific individuals in specific moments of historical necessity. The child of a Dragonborn has no special claim to the power. 65. Staint. Alessia, the slave who led humanity's first recorded rebellion against elven rule and founded the First Empire, is considered the first Dragonborn in the conventional historical sense, though she may not have possessed the specific ability to absorb dragon souls. 66. The covenant Alessia made with Akatosh, which sealed the gates of oblivion and established the dragonfires of protection, created the Amulet of Kings and the tradition of dragonborn emperorship. 67. Martin Septim's sacrifice at the end of the Oblivion Crisis, when he merged with Akatosh to stop Mehrunes Dagon, shattered the Amulet of Kings permanently and ended the Dragonfire's protection. The Empire lost its magical legitimacy in that moment. 68. The loss of the Amulet of Kings and the Dragonfires directly contributed to the Empire's weakness by the time of the Great War. The Septim Emperors had a divine mandate. The Mede dynasty does not. 69. Titus Mede II, the emperor who signed the White Gold Concordat, inherited an empire already devastated by the Oblivion Crisis, the Red Year in Morrowind, Black Marsh's secession, and Elsweir's effective separation. He was not making decisions from a position of strength. 70. The Thalmor's campaign against the Blades began before the Great War officially started. The presentation of Blades' agent heads was the punctuation at the end of a sentence of intelligence work that had already eliminated the entire Blades network in Aldmeri territory. 71. Esbern, the Blades scholar you find hiding in Riften's Ratway, survived the Thalmor purge through caution bordering on obsessive paranoia. He is one of perhaps 3 surviving Blades in all of Skyrim. His expertise on dragons and dragon lore is irreplaceable. 72. Delphine's aggressive, suspicious personality is not a character flaw. It is the behavioral adaptation of someone who watched an entire organization be systematically hunted and killed, and who has survived by trusting no one for decades. 73. Odavieng, the dragon you capture and bargain with to reach Skuldafn, is genuinely conflicted about his service to Alduin. When you defeat him and offer him freedom in exchange for cooperation, his acceptance is not simply pragmatic. It reflects a genuine reconsideration of what Alduin actually represents. 74. Skuldafn, the temple complex where you find the portal to Sovngarde, was a location of enormous religious significance for the dragon cult. Its position in the Velothi Mountains, inaccessible to all but dragons and the most determined travelers, made it an ideal final stronghold. 75. The dragon priest Nakrian guards the portal to Sovngarde at Skuldafn. He is notable for being one of the most powerful dragon priests you encounter in the main quest, possessing a staff that must be used to activate the portal. 76. The portal to Sovngarde at Skuldafn requires a dragon priest's staff to open. This is not simply a dungeon key. It reflects the dragon cult's original design of Skuldafn as a gateway location, accessible only with the proper religious authority. 77. The Stormcloak soldier you encounter upon entering Sovngarde is not an NPC placed for convenience. He represents the ongoing consumption of Nordic souls by Alduin. He arrived recently and has not yet reached the Hall of Valor. Whether he does depends on your choices in that moment. 78. The 4 heroes needed to call the Dragonstorm, the combined shout that clears Sovngarde's mist and forces a confrontation with Alduin, are you and the 3 ancient heroes. The shout requires 4 voices, because it is, in essence, a statement of combined mortal defiance across multiple millennia. 79. When Alduin is finally defeated in Sovngarde, his soul does not disperse the way other dragons' souls do. He does not die in the conventional sense. His cosmic function persists. His self-appointed tyranny ends. 80. The final lines of the Dragonborn story in the main quest are not triumphant declarations. They are quiet acknowledgments. Paarthurnax notes that Alduin's defeat was the correction of a cosmological error, not the elimination of a cosmological function. 81. The Nordic word for the Thu'um, the voice, is also the word for storm in some interpretations. The Greybeards at High Hrothgar, the place where the eye of the storm meets the land, are literally at the intersection of the storm. 82. High Hrothgar means high home of the storm voice in the Old Nordic tongue. The name was not poetic invention. It was a description of the physical and metaphysical reality of the location. 83. The companions in Whiterun trace their institutional heritage directly to Wisegrammer's 500, but their founding purpose was not honor or neutral mercenary service. They were a genocide army, assembled specifically to exterminate the Snow Elves in response to the Night of Tears massacre. 84. The Wisegrammer in Sovngarde's Hall of Valor has been there since before recorded history. The Companion's founder is present in the Nordic afterlife, a constant presence watching over the organization he created, even as that organization has evolved beyond anything he would recognize. 85. The Wuthrad, Ysgramor's legendary battle axe, is repaired during the companion's questline by assembling its scattered fragments. The name means storm's tears in the language of Atmora. Its restoration is not simply a weapon upgrade. It is the reconstruction of a cultural artifact with profound symbolic weight. 86. Kodlak Whitemane's lycanthropy was not something he chose freely as an adult. The Circle's members receive it as part of initiation into the inner group. By the time you meet him, he has grown to hate the condition and dedicated his later years to finding a cure. 87. Lycanthropy prevents entry to Sovngarde because the beast blood corrupts the soul in a way that makes the standard assessment of Nordic virtue difficult to apply. A Nord who dies as a werewolf goes to Hersine's hunting grounds instead. 88. The cure for lycanthropy in the companion's questline requires journeying to Ysgramor's tomb, using the Wuthrad to open its inner chamber, and completing a ritual that purifies Kodlak's spirit even after his death. You are saving his soul retroactively. 89. Vilkas and Farkas, the twin brothers in the companions, have entirely different personalities despite identical appearances. Vilkas is strategically intelligent and cautious. Farkas is straightforwardly warm and loyal. The difference is presented as simply who they are, not as a narrative device. 90. The companion's headquarters, the Jorvaskr, is built around and on top of Ysgramor's original longship, the Ysgramor of the companion's founding legend. The ship that carried the first humans to Skyrim was dragged inland and built around, creating a permanent monument to their arrival. 91. The Night of Tears, when snow elves attacked Sarthal and massacred the human settlement, was not random aggression. The snow elves were after the Eye of Magnus, which was buried beneath Sarthal. The massacre was a targeted operation to prevent humans from possessing a reality-threatening artifact. 92. Ysgramor's return with the 500 companions was, in response to the Night of Tears, a war of extermination against an entire civilization that the Nords understood as unprovoked slaughter. In historical context, both sides had reasons. Neither side was fully wrong or fully right. 93. The Snow Elves, who survived Ysgramor's campaigns, sought refuge with the Dwemer. The Dwemer enslaved them, blinded them with a poison that affected all subsequent generations, and turned them into the Falmer, the blind, degenerate creatures found in Dwemer ruins. 94. The Forgotten Vale, accessible through the Dawnguard questline, is the last preserved piece of Snow Elf civilization as it was before the Dwemer's betrayal. It is breathtakingly beautiful, which makes the contrast with what the Falmer have become all the more devastating. 95. Knight Paladin Gelibor is the last surviving Snow Elf. He has been maintaining the Forgotten Vale's sanctum since before the Dwemer enslaved his people, preserved by magical stasis. He is possibly the most isolated being in all of Tamriel. 96. The Dwemer disappeared in the year 1 Era 700 at the Battle of Red Mountain. The entire race, simultaneously, across all of Tamriel, vanished in a single instant. Their bodies became ash. Their machinery kept running without them. 97. Only one Dwemer survived the disappearance. Yagrum Bagarn, who was traveling in an outer realm when it happened, and returned to find his entire race gone. He is encountered in Morrowind's Tribunal expansion, still alive, still searching for answers. 98. The Dwemer engineer Kagranak struck the heart of Lorkhan with his profane tools at the Battle of Red Mountain, attempting to elevate his people to godhood through engineering. Something went catastrophically wrong. Whether the Dwemer became the skin of the brass god Numidium, were scattered across time, or were simply erased remains the greatest unsolved mystery in Elder Scrolls history. 99. The Dwemer used tonal architecture, the manipulation of reality through sound and resonance, as the foundation of their engineering. Their machinery does not run on conventional power. It runs on specific tonal frequencies that manipulate the fabric of reality itself. 100. This is why Dwemer machines still function thousands of years after their creators vanished. The machinery is not powered by something that depletes. It is tuned to frequencies that are self-sustaining as long as the physical structure maintains its integrity. 101. The Dwemer's tonal architecture represents an attempt to replicate, through pure engineering, what dragons achieve through the Thuum. Both systems involve sound reshaping reality. The Dwemer simply refused to accept that this required divine or innate capability. 102. Soul Gem Enchanting, the standard magical technique used throughout Skyrim, is, in the lore, a form of spiritual kidnapping. Souls trapped in soul gems end up in the soul cairn. Every enchanted item in Skyrim represents someone condemned to the soul cairn. 103. The soul cairn is a plane of oblivion where trapped souls wander in a twilight wasteland. It is not the afterlife any of its inhabitants were promised or expected. They are there because someone with a soul trap spell happened to be nearby when they died. 104. The Reaper of the Soul Cairn is a hidden boss who guards the realm. He is not a random powerful enemy. He is the warden of the afterlife prison, a guardian ensuring the trapped souls remain contained. 105. Vampire Lord Transformation, accessible through the Dawnguard questline, is powered by the specific bloodline of Molag Bal's original vampire creation. The pure blood strain carried by Lord Harkon and his daughter Serana is fundamentally different from common vampirism. 106. Harkon's plan to use Oriel's bow and blood-cursed arrows to blot out the sun was not simply an act of power or cruelty. It was a strategic move to remove vampires' primary vulnerability permanently, achieving a form of vampire supremacy over all mortal life. 107. Serana, Harkon's daughter, has been preserved in magical stasis for thousands of years. Her perspective on the world is simultaneously that of a 4,000-year-old being and someone who, in her personal experience, went to sleep and woke up in a different era. 108. Oriel's bow, the artifact central to the Dawnguard questline, is the weapon of Oriel himself, the elvish interpretation of Akatosh. Its connection to the sun is not merely symbolic. It is a divine instrument with a direct relationship to the solar body. 109. Sun-hallowed arrows fired from Oriel's bow cause a sunburst effect that damages undead dramatically. The theological explanation is that they channel Ariel's divine blessing through the aperture of Magnus's flight wound, concentrated into a weapon. 110. Blood-cursed arrows do the opposite, darkening the sun and removing its passive anti-undead effect temporarily. They represent a deliberate corruption of Oriel's blessing, turning divine light against itself. 111. The Eye of Magnus was found beneath Sarthal, the original human settlement in Skyrim. The Snow Elves' attack on Sarthal was to prevent humans from accessing it. Ysgrammar's revenge unknowingly preserved access to an artifact that predates the current world. 112. The Staff of Magnus and the Eye of Magnus together form a system for controlling or potentially eliminating magic entirely from Tamriel. The Thalmor's interest in both is not academic. It is strategic. 113. Winterhold's great collapse happened because of an instability in the local magical environment that has never been fully explained. The most compelling scholarly theory involves an imbalance related to the Eye of Magnus beneath Sarthal, active even in its dormant state. 114. The College of Winterhold's position, on the edge of a cliff overlooking the ruins of Winterhold proper, is not simply dramatic geography. It visually represents the college's relationship with the surrounding culture. Perched on the edge, above the devastation, present but not connected. 115. Ulfric Stormcloak killed High King Torrig, not in a fair duel in the traditional Nordic sense, but using the Thu'um. The voice knocked Torrig off his feet, leaving him helpless, and Ulfric finished him with a sword while he was incapacitated. 116. Whether this was honorable depends on your interpretation of Nordic dueling tradition. Using all available tools is a legitimate reading. Using overwhelming supernatural force against someone with no way to counter it is a legitimate reading of dishonorable conduct. The game presents both views. 117. The High King of Skyrim's death at Ulfric's hands is directly responsible for the civil war, but the immediate political crisis was exacerbated by the Thalmor, who had been engineering conditions to ensure the conflict would not be resolved quickly. 118. Ulfric's capture and near execution at Helgen is, in the lore, something the Thalmor viewed with complicated feelings. His death would have ended the rebellion and unified Skyrim under Imperial control, which was not what they wanted. His escape allowed the war to continue. 119. The Imperial General Tullius despite being presented as the antagonist of the Stormcloak questline, is actually a competent and genuinely committed soldier who believes deeply in Imperial values. His frustration with Skyrim's politics is authentic. 120. Maven Blackbriar controls Riften in ways that transcend her official position. She manages the Thieves Guild, the Dark Brotherhood, the local economy, and has leverage over the Jarl's own household. If the Empire wins the Civil War, she becomes Jarl, making visible what was already functionally true. 121. The Thieves Guild's decline before your arrival was directly caused by Mercer Frey's theft of the Skeleton Key, Nocturnal's Daedric artifact. Without the key, the guild lost the divine patronage that had been ensuring their success. 122. The shadow marks carved throughout Skyrim's cities are a real communication system used by the guild. They encode information about safe houses, profitable targets, and dangers in a symbolic language invisible to non-members. 123. Nocturnal, the Daedric Prince of Night and Luck, requires that the skeleton key be returned to her realm in exchange for renewing her blessing on the guild. The quest does not let you keep the key. The blessing requires the sacrifice of what would be the most useful tool imaginable. 124. The Dark Brotherhood's founding mythology involves the Night Mother, an unnamed woman who killed her 5 children at Sithis' request to become his bride. Whether this is literal history or symbolic mythology, it establishes the Brotherhood's theological framework as built on ultimate sacrifice. 125. Cicero, the eccentric jester, is the last link to the Dark Brotherhood's pre-collapse traditions. His apparent madness is the result of years of solitary service to an organization that had ceased to function, maintaining faith in traditions with no one to share them with. 126. Astrid's leadership of the Brotherhood's Skyrim sanctuary represents a deliberate break from the traditional structure. She operates without a listener, without a Night Mother-sanctioned contract system, taking jobs independently. This deviation is presented in the Brotherhood's theology as the source of the organization's vulnerability. 127. When Astrid betrays the Brotherhood to the Empire, she breaks the 5 tenets that govern the organization. The tenets are not bureaucratic rules, they are theological law. Breaking them is both criminal and sacred violation simultaneously. 128. The Brotherhood's 5 tenets forbid theft from other members, killing other members, betrayal of the Brotherhood, disobeying the Night Mother, and refusing contracts. All 5 were effectively violated by Astrid's actions. 129. The Black Sacrament, the ritual used to contact the Brotherhood, is self-selecting in a specific way. Its requirements are so specific and so disturbing, involving flesh and bone and genuine murderous intent expressed through ritual, that only someone truly committed to having someone killed would successfully complete it. 130. Aventus Aretino, the orphan boy performing the Black Sacrament in Windhelm at the start of the Brotherhood questline, is a child. He learned forbidden ritual magic, acquired his mother's remains, and spent weeks chanting alone in the dark because it was the only option he could imagine for escaping systematic abuse. That is what the situation in that orphanage was. 131. Grelad the Kind, the headmistress of the Honor Hall orphanage, is genuinely monstrous. She beats and starves the children in her care, forbids them from being adopted to keep the orphanage running, and seems to enjoy the power she has over people who cannot fight back. 132. The question of whether killing Grelad is justice or murder is not resolved by the game. She is presented as someone who has done real harm to real children, and will continue doing so. The Brotherhood is presented as an amoral organization that kills for pay. These 2 facts exist together without resolution. 133. The Night of Tears is the pivotal event of ancient Nordic history. The Snow Elves' attack on Sarthal killed most of the human settlement and drove the survivors back to Atmora. The retaliation was so comprehensive that it effectively ended Snow Elf civilization within a few generations. 134. Both the Night of Tears and Ysgramor's retaliation were, in different readings, understandable. The Snow Elves were protecting themselves from an artifact that could destabilize reality. The humans experienced an apparently unprovoked massacre. Neither side's motivation was simple. 135. The Forsworn of the Reach are the indigenous people of Markarth, descended from the original Breton inhabitants who lived there before Nordic conquest. Their rebellion is an attempt to reclaim occupied land, not random violence. 136. The Markarth incident, in which Ulfric and his militia retook the city from the Forsworn, ended with Ulfric being allowed to let his men worship Talos, then that permission being revoked under Thalmor pressure. The betrayal of that promise is what radicalized moderate Reachmen into the violent Forsworn movement. 137. Madanach, the king in rags imprisoned in Sidna Mine, is simultaneously a terrorist and a freedom fighter whose cause has a genuine historical foundation. The game does not flatten this into simple heroism or simple villainy. 138. The giants of Skyrim are not hostile by nature. They are semi-nomadic herders who will not attack unless their territory or their mammoth herds are threatened. Players who approach giant camps peacefully and maintain respectful distance can pass without conflict. 139. The Morning Giant near Broken Tower Redoubt is standing vigil over a dead mammoth. He is not aggressive unless attacked. He returns periodically to the location where his companion died. He is grieving. 140. Giants have a painting tradition. Ochre and natural pigment images can be found in and around giant camps, suggesting a cultural and artistic life that the game presents as existing regardless of whether the player notices it. 141. The Khajiit caravans that camp outside Skyrim cities are, in the lore, part intelligence network for Elswehr's leadership. They move freely, see everything, and report back. Some distribute skooma as a secondary intelligence operation, using addiction to create informants. 142. The Khajiit are refused entry to Skyrim cities not because of any specific recent crime, but because of deeply embedded racist assumptions about their culture and the drug trade. This prejudice persists, despite generations of Khajiit who have lived peacefully in Tamriel. 143. Ayla the Huntress explicitly states she will never seek a cure for her lycanthropy. She is proud of her beast blood and sees it as an enhancement, not a corruption. The game respects this perspective rather than presenting it as something to be corrected. 144. The Ebony Warrior, who appears at level 80 and requests an honorable death in battle, is applying Nordic values about dying well to the situation of someone who has achieved everything possible. He has lived well. He wants to die well. He does not want to waste away. 145. The Ebony Warrior's request is presented by the lore as both completely comprehensible within Nordic cultural values and as raising genuine questions about whether killing someone at their request is mercy, violence, or something that resists those categories entirely. 146. Neloth, the ancient Telvanni wizard on Solstheim, is several centuries old. His casual dismissal of concerns about others' well-being, his willingness to experiment on people without consent, his general contempt for anyone he considers intellectually inferior, are all portrayed as the product of having lived so long that normal moral frameworks have become optional. 147. The Skal village on Solstheim maintains a tradition of the All-Maker, a pantheistic spiritual framework that sees the divine in all natural elements. When Mirok's influence corrupts the All-Maker stones, it is not simply a magical attack. It is a spiritual desecration of the Skal's entire relationship with the divine. 148. Storn Cragstrider, the Skal shaman, voluntarily gives his life and his people's most sacred knowledge to Hermaeus Mora in exchange for the last word of Bend Will. He knows what the prince will do. He does it anyway, because the alternative is allowing Mirok to continue consuming people's souls and free will. 149. The Bend Will shout, when used to ride dragons, is explicitly described in the lore as a form of domination over a sentient being. The Greybeards would consider this application of the Thuum a violation of the Way of the Voice, regardless of its tactical utility. 150. Hermaeus Mora's realm of Apocrypha is described as an endless library where every book has a black cover with no title. The ghosts of scholars move through the stacks endlessly, still searching for knowledge they never found in life. 151. The Black Books, Hermaeus Mora's artifacts that allow access to Apocrypha, are described as lures. They are placed in the world specifically to attract scholars and ambitious mortals. Every person who reads so is in the lore, exactly the kind of person Mora wants to collect. 152. The wretched abyss form of Hermaeus Mora, a floating orb of tentacles and eyes, is his avatar in the mortal world when the Dragonborn DLC is not installed. With the DLC, he appears in his fuller form. Both are presentations of something that does not have a form any mortal perception could accurately contain. 153. The dragon cult's relationship with death was complicated in ways the game does not fully explore. Dragon priests performed sacrifices, yes, but the rituals also had elements related to preserving the faithful against eventual resurrection when Alduin returned. The line between sacrifice and preservation was, in the cult's theology, not a line at all. 154. The Thuum used by ancient Nords in battle was common, almost ordinary. Entire armies had tongues, people trained in the voice, fighting in formation, and using shouts as standard military tools. The current situation, where only the Greybeards and the Dragonborn regularly use the Thuum, represents a dramatic degradation of Nordic military and cultural capability. 155. Jurgen Windcaller was known as one of the most powerful tongues of his era before he founded the Greybeards. His conversion to pacifism was not that of a weak man finding an excuse to stop fighting. It was one of the most capable warriors of his generation, concluding that his capability itself was the problem. 156. The Greybeard, known as Wulfgar, was, according to the lore, on the verge of transcendence at some point before the Dragonborn arrived. The mastery of the Thuum, pursued far enough, changes what a person is in ways that approach the divine. 157. Arngyr's deep reluctance to help the Dragonborn retrieve the horn of Jurgen Windcaller is not obstructionism. He is genuinely concerned that involving the Greybeards in the political and military crisis of the Dragon War will corrupt the purity of what they represent. He believes, sincerely, that the way of the voice is more important than any specific immediate conflict. 158. The stars in the Elder Scrolls cosmology are holes in the fabric of Mundus, tears made by spirits who fled creation. When you look up at night in Skyrim, you are looking at the exit wounds of divine abandonment. The light is magical energy, bleeding through from Aetherius. 159. Magica, the magical energy used for all spells and enchantments in Skyrim, flows into Mundus through these stellar perforations. The entire economy of magical power in the game is powered by wounds left by fleeing gods. 160. The last Dragonborn's fate is deliberately left unwritten. Unlike every previous protagonist in Elder Scrolls history, you leave no clear historical record after the defeat of Alduin. You save the world, and then you disappear from the documentation. Whether this is because you chose a quiet life, remained as an eternal guardian, found yourself drawn deeper into Hermaeus Mora's service, or something else entirely, is a story the universe keeps to itself. Part 14. The world continues stories. The main quest walks past. There is a tendency, when you are focused on the main quest, to experience Skyrim as a world that exists in service of the central narrative. You are the Dragonborn. Everything is organized around your journey to defeat Alduin. The bandits in the road, the dragon circling overhead, the characters who ask you for help with their personal crises, all of it feels like content arranged for your progression. But if you stop moving for a moment and look at what is happening in Skyrim that has nothing to do with you, a much stranger and more complete world comes into focus. Consider Windhelm, the oldest city in Skyrim, founded by Ysgramor himself, now the seat of the Stormcloak Rebellion, and one of the most overtly segregationist places in the province. The Dark Elves, who live in the Grey Quarter, have been in Skyrim for over 200 years. The Red Year, when Red Mountain erupted and devastated Morrowind, happened in 4 Era 5, nearly 2 centuries before the game's events. Multiple generations of Dark Elves have been born in Skyrim. Some of them have never seen Morrowind. They are not immigrants in any meaningful contemporary sense. They are residents, citizens in every practical way, who have spent their entire lives being treated as temporary guests in a city that was old before their grandparents' grandparents were born. The Argonians cannot even enter Windhelm's walls. They live on the docks, in the cold, outside. The casual brutality of this arrangement is presented in the game as background texture, as flavor, to make the city feel lived in. But underneath the texture is a specific political reality. Ulfric Stormcloak's famous speeches about Nord freedom and sovereignty do not include a single word about the people already living in his city who are denied basic civic participation. Freedom for Nords. Specifically, and only Nords. The Civil War storyline gives you no good options, because both options are, in different ways, already complicit in the conditions that make Skyrim what it is. The empire that would restore order is the empire that signed the Concordat and banned Talos worship. The independent Skyrim that Ulfric envisions is one that will not, based on all available evidence, address its systematic treatment of non-Nordic residents. There is no third option the game offers. There is no political candidate running on a platform of genuine inclusive reform. There is just this: two imperfect, damaged institutions fighting over a province that is going to be fundamentally compromised regardless of which one wins. The economy of Skyrim is another thread the main quest walks past. Most of Skyrim's holds are struggling. Riften, the most overtly impoverished major city, is run by a crime syndicate operating in plain sight. Winterhold is a ghost town, most of its structures having collapsed into the sea decades ago. Even Whiterun, the most prosperous and central of the holds, has visible poverty in its lower districts. The economic structures that supported Skyrim before the Great War have not recovered. The merchant class is thin. Trade routes are dangerous due to both political instability and the return of dragons, and taxation is still being collected to fund an imperial military presence that is simultaneously fighting a civil war. Dragons attacking cities and roads is not simply a combat encounter. In an agricultural society dependent on trade routes between settlements, a dragon nesting near a major road can devastate an entire region's food supply over the course of a season. The economic consequences of the dragon crisis are never fully explored in the main quest, but they are present in every struggling innkeeper and every merchant bemoaning the cost of doing business. The College of Winterhold sits on its cliff above the ruined city and continues its work regardless of what the province thinks of it. After the Eye of Magnus incident, the college's relationship with Skyrim's political establishment is slightly improved, but the underlying distrust remains. The Nords who blamed the college for the Great Collapse have not had their minds changed by anything the Dragonborn did. They have simply been given a new event to explain through the same lens. Magic in Skyrim is treated with a combination of fear and contempt by most of the population. The cultural memory of the Great Collapse, even in its distorted form that blames the college, has reinforced the oldest Norse cultural instinct that magic is something foreign, something elven, something that does not belong in the hands of honest Nord warriors, who rely on steel and the strength of their bodies. The college exists on the edge of the province, geographically and culturally, and will probably continue to do so regardless of any main quest resolution. The companions of Whiterun, if you completed their quest line, are in a period of institutional transformation. The Circle's lycanthropy, which had been a defining secret of the organization for generations, has been addressed. Whether the organization rebuilds along the same lines or evolves into something different depends on leadership decisions that happen after your involvement ends. Ayla the Huntress, who refused the cure, represents one possible future direction. Farkas and Vilkas, who accepted it, represent another. The Dark Brotherhood, in its Skyrim remnant, is rebuilding from a state of near total collapse. Whether the listener, the Dragonborn, stays involved after the main questline ends, or returns to the rest of their life, is a choice the game leaves open. The Brotherhood has been almost destroyed before and rebuilt. It may be resilient enough to do so again, or the combination of Astrid's betrayal, the Emperor's assassination, and the Thalmor's ongoing efforts to eliminate remnants of the pre-Concordat institutional power structure may be too much. The Thieves' Guild in Riften, with the skeleton key returned and Nocturnal's blessing renewed, is in theory rebuilding toward the prominence it had before Mercer Frey's betrayal. Maven Blackbriar is still involved. That involvement ensures a level of resources and political protection. Whether it ensures integrity or something else is a question the Guild's history makes difficult to answer optimistically. Serana, if you completed the Dawnguard questline, is the last survivor of the Volkihar vampire bloodline after Harkon's defeat. Her choice about whether to cure her own vampirism or maintain it is one of the most genuinely difficult personal decisions in the game's side content. She has been a vampire for thousands of years. The condition is not simply a disease she contracted. It is a fundamental part of what she is. Removing it would not restore some previous state. It would create something entirely new, a person who has never existed before, built from the ruins of something ancient. Majol the lioness in Riften carries around evidence of a larger problem, the proliferation of dwarven automaton technology that has been salvaged from ruins and deployed by criminal organizations. Dwemer artifacts were not designed for this purpose. Their original functions were specific, and their repurposing as weapons and tools of oppression represents a desecration of engineering that was, whatever else you say about the Dwemer, genuinely extraordinary. Farengar's Secret Fire, the court wizard in Whiterun, is quietly one of the most competent mages in Skyrim, despite his status as a secondary NPC. His research on dragons predated the Dragon Crisis, and his enthusiasm for the subject is, in context, the professional excitement of someone who spent years studying a field everyone thought was purely historical, and then woke up to find the subject matter landing on the roof. Proventus Avenici, the steward of Dragon's Reach, carries an enormous administrative burden. The Jarl's Hold is simultaneously managing the Civil War's political pressures, the Dragon Crisis's practical threats, and the normal governance of one of Skyrim's most strategically important holds. The man is stressed in every line of his dialogue, and given everything he is managing, this is entirely understandable. And Helgen, where the story began. The city was destroyed by Alduin in the opening sequence and never rebuilt during the events of the game. Players can return to find it in ruins, occasionally occupied by bandits who move into the empty buildings. The survivors of Helgen's population scattered across the province. Alvor the blacksmith in Riverwood, Hod and Gerder, the Imperials who helped you escape. They are all living with the aftermath of a catastrophe that was, in a very real sense, both the worst thing that happened to them and the thing that made the defeat of Alduin possible. The ruins of Helgen are one of the saddest and most quietly eloquent locations in the game. The buildings that were standing 2 hours before the game started are now empty and collapsed. Children's toys are scattered in what used to be houses. Cooking pots sit on cold hearths. A garrison that was preparing to execute 2 prisoners is ash and broken stone. The World Eater touched this place first, and the first dragonborn in centuries nearly died here, and neither the destruction nor the near death registered in any historical text, because bigger things happened afterward and the scribes were busy. The game never prompts you to feel anything specific about Helgen. It does not put quest markers on the ruins or give you a mission to help the survivors rebuild. It just leaves the ruins there, visible from the road, increasingly vegetated as the game's seasons turn. A monument to the first chapter of a story that was about something much larger than one burning town. Closing. The beauty of an unfinished world. We have come a long way tonight. From the cosmological foundations of Alduin's nature to the fine detail of Grelod, the kind's cruelty to orphan children. From the birth of the dragon language before linear time began to the shadow marks the Thieves' Guild carves in stone outside taverns in Riften. What makes Skyrim's lore remarkable, what makes it worth this kind of extended exploration, is not any single brilliant idea. It is the way the ideas connect. The way the snow that never melts on the throat of the world relates to the time wound, relates to the Elder Scroll, relates to the ancient heroes, relates to the Dragonrend. Shout, relates to what you are, and why you were needed. Nothing in this world is purely decorative. Even the things that look like furniture, the gourds with their inexplicable physics, the cheese wheels in the bandit camps, the copies of the lusty Argonian maid in the hands of every court jester in the province, they are woven into a texture that makes the world feel like it existed before you arrived and will continue after you leave. Alduin's story is not the story of a villain who was evil for the sake of plot. It is the story of a cosmic function that developed preferences and let those preferences override its purpose. It is, in a way, a very human story. The most powerful being in the world, confronted with its own nature, deciding it deserves more than what it was made for. And the cost of that decision falling on thousands of years of ordinary people who just wanted to live their lives without being eaten. Your story is not the story of a hero who was destined for greatness. It is the story of the wrong person in the right place at the right time, given a gift they did not ask for, in service of a purpose they did not choose, carrying the weight of everything that came before them, and setting down that weight, finally, in the Hall of Valor, in Sovngarde, where the honored dead are waiting. There is something worth sitting with in the game's ending that tends to get lost in the moment of victory. When Alduin is defeated in Sovngarde, you do not receive the usual triumphant fanfare of a conclusive hero's journey. The ancient heroes who fought alongside you return to their eternal celebration in the Hall of Valor. Soon, the Divine Guardian acknowledges your deed and offers you passage back to Nirn, and then you are simply back in Skyrim. The credits have not rolled yet. The province is still there. The problems are still there. The war is still going on. The Thalmor are still operating. The college is still isolated. The Thieves' Guild is still criminal. The Dark Brotherhood is still whatever state you left it in. The defeat of Alduin changes the cosmological situation in Skyrim dramatically. It removes the immediate physical threat of a World Eater actively consuming souls in the Nordic afterlife. It ends the systematic resurrection of an ancient dragon army. It corrects the cosmic error of a divine function operating out of alignment with its purpose. These are enormous, irreversible changes that matter profoundly. They do not fix what people have done to each other. The Dunmer of the Grey Quarter will still wake up tomorrow in their cramped and overlooked corner of Windhelm. The Forsworn will still be fighting for land their ancestors occupied before anyone named it Skyrim. The children in Honor Hall Orphanage, before and after Grelod, the kind's removal, will still be in a system that does not prioritize them. The soldiers on both sides of the Civil War will still be burying their dead in frozen ground. The main quest gives Skyrim its cosmological correction. The province's actual well-being is left to slower, messier processes, to political change that takes generations, to economic recovery that requires conditions that are not yet in place, to cultural shifts that begin with individual decisions and accumulate so gradually that no one moment feels like the turning point. This is, perhaps, the most honest thing Skyrim says. Not through its storytelling, which is often more focused on epic sweep than on the texture of how ordinary life improves, but through its design, through the persistence of all those unsolved problems in the corners of every major city and along every road through the wilderness. The world was in trouble before Alduin. The world will remain in trouble after him. The dragon in the sky was the most dramatic problem. It was not the only one, not even close. Paarthurnax, alone on the summit of the throat of the world, is still meditating, still fighting his nature, still choosing, daily, to be something other than what he was made to be. If his project of reforming dragonkind succeeds, the world that emerges a generation or two from now might be genuinely different, not perfect. Nothing in the Elder Scrolls universe tends toward perfection, but different. A world where dragons and mortals have rebuilt something closer to the original arrangement, the mutually beneficial relationship of the pre-corruption dragon cult, but without the hierarchy, without the enforced worship, without the dragon priests who became tyrants. That is a long project. Paarthurnax is patient. He has had thousands of years of practice at choosing patience over instinct. The last Dragonborn, wherever they ended up, left no record. No historical document names them explicitly in the way that documents name Tiber Septim or Remen Cyrodiil or Wisegrammar. They are present in Skyrim's history, the way a stone dropped in still water is present in the ripples that spread outward for minutes afterward. You cannot find the stone anymore, but the water remembers, and somewhere in that water, in those ripples spreading through the Fourth Era and into whatever comes next, is everything we talked about tonight. The cosmic correction of Alduin's defeat. The thousands of years of dragon cult maintenance that made it possible. Paarthurnax's 4,000-year commitment to being better. The three ancient heroes who created a weapon from their own suffering. The Blades who kept faith with a prophecy across centuries of darkness. The Greybeards who chose silence as the most disciplined use of overwhelming power. The Dragonborn who appeared at exactly the moment the universe needed them to. A prisoner in a cart, a world that needed saving in a specific way. A story that is not quite over. Sleep well tonight, wherever you are listening from. The frost is outside the window. The fire is low. The mountain is dark and enormous, and full of old things that are still moving, still keeping vigil, still waiting for something they believe is coming. The world has been saved, for now. The machine is back in alignment. The next Kalpa can proceed on schedule, and somewhere on the throat of the world, a very old dragon sits alone in the cold, fighting his own nature for another day, and wins. If tonight's journey into Skyrim's deepest lore settled something in you, the most meaningful thing you can do is subscribe and leave a comment below telling me where in the world you are right now and what time it is. It genuinely means the world to know who these late nights are reaching. And if there is a game whose lore you want me to unpack in the same way, drop that in the comments too. Every suggestion shapes what comes next. Rest now. The dragons can wait until morning.